Tonight we enter the clay silence of Sumer, where death is not an ending, but a doorway beneath the earth. In the late 19th century, excavators working at Nippur uncovered thousands of tablets, many later studied by scholars at the University of Pennsylvania Museum. Among them, the Sumerian specialist Samuel Noah Kramer helped bring forgotten myths back into modern speech. These tablets do not shout, they murmur, they speak of gods, dust, gates, offerings, and the dim fate waiting under every human house. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as the night settles around you, right where you're listening from and your local time somewhere across the dark curve of the world, another listener may be entering this same ancient shadow. You stand now in Nippur, not as a tourist, but as a quiet witness. The air is warm. The dust tastes faintly bitter. Sunlight lies flat over ruined brick, pale and exhausted, as though even the sky has grown old here. Beneath your feet, buried under centuries of wind and settlement, lie the words of people who believed the dead continued somewhere below, not in paradise, not in flame, somewhere quieter. The Sumerians called that hidden realm by names that feel heavy in the mouth. It was the great below, the dark land, the house from which no traveller truly returned. Yet the strange thing is this. They did not imagine it as chaos. They imagined it as a place with rules. That may be the first unsettling truth waiting in the clay. Death, for Sumer, was not the collapse of order. It was order continued in another direction. You walk between broken walls where temple courtyards once opened to the sky. A priest passes in your imagination, linen brushing his ankles, carrying oil, bread, and water. A woman kneels at a household shrine, whispering the name of someone recently gone. A child watches without understanding. A fly settles on a bowl. Somewhere nearby, a scribe presses a reed into damp clay. The sound is small. A click, a breath, a mark. Those marks become the oldest surviving literature in the world. Records confirm that Sumerian writing developed in southern Mesopotamia for 5,000 years ago. First for accounts and administration, then for hymns, royal praise, myth, lament, and memory. A gentle irony hides there. Humanity began writing partly to count grain, sheep, jars, and workers. Then, almost as if embarrassed by its own practicality, it began writing about gods and death. That feels very human, does it not? You begin with numbers, then you ask why you die. The Sumerians lived in cities rising from river plain and reed marsh. Their world was built from mud brick because stone was rare. Walls needed constant repair. Canals needed clearing. Fields depended on water brought carefully from rivers. Life was labour, rhythm, heat, and obligation. Nothing remained stable without attention. Perhaps this shaped how they imagined the dead. A person did not vanish entirely. Some part remained, a shadowed presence needing care. The dead depended on the living, just as the fields depended on canals. Without offerings, remembrance, and burial, the departed might become hungry, thirsty, restless, or forgotten. A quirky old belief appears in later Mesopotamian traditions, and it may preserve something older. The neglected dead were sometimes imagined as feeding on scraps, dust, or whatever foul remains the living would not touch. It is a grim little detail, almost rude in its honesty. The afterlife, in this vision, is not decorated with golden clouds. It is managed like a household with poor supplies. Someone must bring water, someone must say the name, someone must remember. You feel the temple shade deepen. The mud brick wall beside you is rough under your fingers. It leaves powder on your skin, like the faint residue of time itself. The city is alive around you, yet death is not hidden away from life. It is under floors, behind rituals, inside family duty, present in the food placed down for those no longer eating. Here, the soul is not a bright angel rising upward. The Sumerian idea is more difficult, and more intimate. Modern scholars often translate the surviving concept as a ghost, spirit, or shade. But none of those words fits perfectly. Researchers at major universities continue to debate how close this being was to what modern listeners call a soul. Some argue it was more like a social echo, the person is remembered and ritually sustained. Others see a genuine spiritual double, a surviving identity that entered the underworld. The tablets do not settle the matter for us. They rarely do. They break, they blur, they leave gaps just where certainty would be most comfortable. That is one reason they still feel alive. They do not hand you a finished doctrine. They give you fragments, like bones uncovered from sand. You imagine a tablet lifted from the earth? It is the colour of baked bread, though far less gentle. Its edges are chipped. Its lines are crowded with wedge-shaped signs. A curator in a quiet museum room turns it carefully under soft light. Somewhere in those marks may be a lament for a dead king, a myth about a goddess descending below, or a line about a ghost in need of offerings. The dead are not distant in these texts. They are near. They press close to the living like cold air under a door. At Nippur, and other ancient cities, archaeology reveals a culture deeply concerned with ritual order. Temples were rebuilt again and again. Offerings were counted. Divine names were praised. Kings claimed to serve gods who ruled over city, storm, fertility, justice, writing, and the underworld. In such a world, death also required administration. Even grief had procedures. This may sound severe, but it carries tenderness inside it. To pour water for the dead is to admit they still matter. To speak a name is to resist erasure. To bury someone properly is to say that the person remains part of a chain reaching backward and forward. You are not merely alive. You are responsible. That responsibility is the soft weight at the centre of the Sumerian afterlife. It does not begin in the underworld. It begins in the living room, beside a burial place, with a vessel of water, a small portion of food, and a name spoken into the dark. Perhaps the Sumerians understood something modern life often tries to forget. The dead do not leave only because they stop breathing. They leave slowly as memory thins, as names fall silent, as homes are abandoned, as tablets crack underground. Yet clay can be patient. Clay can wait longer than flesh. For thousands of years, these tablets slept beneath ruined cities. Above them, empires rose and vanished. Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, and others passed over the same lands. Languages changed. Temples collapsed. Rivers shifted. Still, the clay kept its small incisions. And then, one day, hands lifted them again. That is the scene you enter tonight. Not a lecture hall exactly. Not a tomb exactly. Something between them. A low chamber of memory, where science, myth, dust, and sleep begin to share the same air. You're standing at the beginning of a descent. The first clue is simple, but it opens downward without end. The Sumerians believed something remained after death, and that remaining thing entered a hidden world beneath the living. What was it? A soul, perhaps. A shadow, perhaps. A name that refused to disappear. The tablets do not answer cleanly. They invite you lower, sign by sign, through heat, silence, broken myth, and the patient darkness below the earth. And as your breathing slows, the old city seems to breathe with you, quietly, carefully, as if the dead are listening too. The city settles into evening, and you feel the heat leaving the brick by slow degrees. It does not vanish at once. It rises from the walls in tired waves, carrying the smell of dust, bitumen, cooked grain, animal hide, and river mud. The streets narrow around you. They are not romantic streets. They are practical, uneven, crowded, and alive with small sounds. A sandal scrapes against packed earth. A donkey snorts in a courtyard. Someone shuts a wooden door with a dull, careful thud. From a roof, a woman shakes out a woven mat, and fine dust falls through the amber light. The city is still awake, but it is beginning to lower its voice. You walk deeper into the ordinary world of Sumer, because this is where death hides most naturally. Not only in tombs, not only in myths, not only in the names of gods carved into clay. Death is present in storage rooms, kitchens, sleeping platforms, thresholds, and family courtyards. It is tucked into the architecture of daily life. Beneath some houses, the dead rest close to the living. That fact feels strange now, because modern life often pushes the dead away. Cemeteries are placed apart. Hospitals and funeral homes manage the final stages quietly. Yet in many Mesopotamian households, burial could remain intimate. Archaeologists have found graves beneath floors, near domestic spaces, and within the lived environment of families. The dead were not always exiled from the home. They remained underfoot, part of the house's memory. You pause at a low doorway. Inside, the light is dim. A clay lamp trembles in a niche, its flame fed by oil. The air smells of smoke and old reed baskets. A family eats in silence, not because they are unhappy, but because food is work, and work has been long. The father's hands are cracked from canal labour. The mother's hair carries the scent of baking. A child leans against a wall, half asleep already. Below that floor, perhaps, someone is buried. A grandmother, a brother, a child whose name was once called softly. It is possible that a small offering place stands nearby. A cup, a bowl, a vessel for water. The exact arrangements varied, and the evidence is not always easy to interpret. Scholars from institutions such as the University of Chicago and Yale have long discussed how much domestic burial tells us about ancestor care, family identity, and the social presence of the dead. The debate remains open because a grave beneath a house can speak in many directions. It may suggest love, property rights, ritual duty, fear, or all of these at once. The walls do not explain themselves. They wait. You notice how much in this world depends on maintenance. Mud brick melts if abandoned. Canals choke if neglected. Granaries fail if records are careless. Temples lose purity if offerings stop. The Sumerian city is not a machine that runs by itself. It is an agreement repeated every day between humans, gods, water, animals, fields, and memory. So the dead also require upkeep. This is not merely superstition, though it carries beliefs that may seem distant now. It is a social structure. The living inherit obligations from the dead, and the dead depend on the living for continued recognition. A person's fate is tied not only to divine judgment, but to the fragile behaviour of relatives. There is a quiet cruelty in that. There is tenderness too. Your mind drifts to the baked earth beyond the city, where the canals shine in the last light. Date palms stand in rows. Their fronds rattle faintly. Frogs begin speaking in the reed beds. The river moves with a slow, brown patience, carrying silt from far mountains to fields that cannot survive without it. Every harvest is a borrowed gift, and every gift must be managed. Records from early Mesopotamia confirm that temples played a major role in organizing land, labor, food, and offerings. Their tablets list barley, animals, oil, textiles, and personnel with an almost hypnotic precision. From this, you sense a culture that trusted order, but never assumed order was effortless. Even sacred life needed accounting. Even the divine household required supplies. A slightly amusing detail survives in the habits of scribes. Some training tablets contain repeated practice lines, clumsy marks, and little signs of students learning by copying older compositions. It is oddly comforting. Even the keepers of sacred words had homework. Somewhere, a young scribe probably made mistakes, grew bored, pressed too hard, and annoyed his teacher. Humanity changes less than it pretends. Yet beneath that gentle humour lies something more solemn. If writing can preserve grain accounts, it can preserve names. If writing can record offerings to gods, it can also protect ritual obligations to the dead. The tablet becomes more than a document. It becomes a small device against disappearance. The city's temple now rises before you. Its platform catches the fading sun. Steps climb upward, while your thoughts move downward. That contrast is important. Sumerian sacred architecture often reached toward the sky, but Sumerian death thought turned below. The gods might receive incense above the plain, yet the dead entered a realm beneath the visible world. The living stand between heights and depths. You feel that position in your own body. Your feet press into earth, while smoke from lamps and offerings lifts past your face. The smell is sharp, oily, and intimate. A priest's chant moves through the courtyard, measured and repetitive, calming because it does not hurry. The words are meant for gods, but grief may be listening too. This is how the city teaches you. It does not explain the afterlife through one grand doctrine. It surrounds you with habits. Repair the wall, clear the canal, feed the household, name the ancestor, honour the god, record the measure, pour the water. Everything depends on continuation. Perhaps that is why death feels so unsettling here. It interrupts breath, but it does not interrupt relationship. The person is gone from sight, yet not gone from obligation. Their absence remains organised into life. They must be settled, remembered, and placed correctly within the unseen order. You pass a storage room where sealed jars stand in rows. Their clay stoppers bear impressions from cylinder seals. Tiny scenes roll across the hardened surface. Figures approach gods. Animals bend their necks. Symbols turn status into image. In a world where many people cannot read, seals speak through repetition and recognition. A fringe little thought has haunted some modern dreamers of ancient Mesopotamia. They imagine these seals as miniature maps of cosmic power, as if every rolling image hides secret astronomy. Most scholars are cautious about that. A cylinder seal is often an administrative and artistic tool, not a stargate in your pocket. Still, the idea has a peculiar charm. People have always wanted small objects to open large mysteries. You smile faintly, then let the thought pass. The real mystery is already large enough. Night gathers in the lanes. A breeze slips from the river, carrying dampness into the dry city. Dogs bark beyond a wall. Somewhere, bread is being broken. Somewhere else, a mourner sits beside a body, knowing mourning will require ritual action, not just tears. That is the difference this world keeps showing you. Grief is not only emotion, grief is labour. It has vessels, gestures, words, timings, and consequences. To mourn properly is to help the dead take their place. To fail may leave them unsettled. The floor cools beneath your feet. The house grows quiet. Under the city, under the packed clay, under the sleep of children and the sighing of animals, the dead wait in their ordered darkness. They are not yet explained. They are not yet judged in your understanding, but they are close enough to touch through dust, offering, and memory. You remain in the doorway, listening as the ancient city breathes around you. Above, the stars begin to appear, pale and remote. Below, another geography waits without stars. Between them, the living keep their lamps burning, because someone must tend the fragile border between warmth and shadow. A tablet rests in your hands, small enough to seem harmless, heavy enough to feel strangely alive. Its surface is crowded with signs pressed long ago by a reed stylus, each mark shaped by a hand that has become dust. The clay is not smooth. It carries shallow ridges, broken corners, and tiny scars left by time. You do not read it as a modern book. You approach it like a sealed room. The first thing it teaches you is patience. Sumerian texts about death rarely arrive whole. They come to you in fragments, scattered among hymns, laments, myths, lexical lists, royal songs, and ritual references. Some lines survive clearly, others are missing. Some tablets repeat known stories with differences, as if memory itself had many doorways. A scholar may spend years joining pieces that once sat together, and still a crucial line may remain lost. That is how the dead speak here, not in full speeches, in shards. The room around you is quiet. Perhaps a museum study room, perhaps a storehouse of carefully numbered objects. Cotton gloves brush clay, a pencil notes a sign, a lamp gives pale light without warmth. Somewhere beyond the wall, ordinary modern traffic hums, but here the air seems older, denser, almost dusty in the lungs. Records from the great tablet collections of Mesopotamia confirm that scribes copied older compositions for centuries. This means some surviving stories may preserve ideas far older than the copies themselves. The text you see may be from a later hand, yet it may carry a tradition that had already been ancient when that scribe sat down. It is rather like hearing an old song through a cracked door. The singer is late, but the melody is older. A hymn may praise a goddess and suddenly mention the great below. A lament may grieve over a destroyed city and compare its silence to the realm of the dead. A myth may follow a divine figure into darkness, describing gates, rules, judges, and stripped power. These are not handbook entries, they are flashes. They appear, vanish, and leave the imagination working. Your eyes rest on a line concerning a dark house. Not a grave alone, not merely a pit, but a house for all who go downward. The image is simple, that is why it lingers. A house suggests order, enclosure, and belonging. Yet this house is one no one eagerly enters. It gathers the king, the worker, the priestess, the infant, the soldier, the weaver, and the nameless poor. The afterlife is strangely democratic in its gloom. No one escapes by being important. That mainstream fact appears again and again in studies of Mesopotamian religion. Unlike some later traditions that developed elaborate moral heavens or punishments, early Mesopotamian texts often portray the underworld as a common destination. Rank may affect treatment, offerings, and memory, but mortality itself is shared. Even kings who claimed divine favour still descended into the same hidden order beneath the earth. This is not comforting in the usual sense. It is levelling. It tells you that palace walls and temple platforms do not reach beyond death. The wealthy may have finer burials. The powerful may receive grander laments. But the road downward remains open beneath every threshold. You feel the tablet's edge against your palm. It is cool now. The myths make the underworld seem both distant and intimate. In one composition, the dead live in darkness and eat dust. In another, ghosts can trouble the living if neglected. In laments, cities themselves become almost ghostly when abandoned, as if the absence of people turns architecture into a corpse. The Sumerians understood ruin not as emptiness, but as a kind of haunting. A quirky detail appears in some old Mesopotamian omen thinking, strange sounds, unusual dreams, or troubling appearances could be interpreted as signs involving ghosts or gods. To a modern listener, this may sound like the world had no privacy at all. Even a bad dream could become paperwork for the supernatural. Yet there is a weary wisdom inside it. When grief is unresolved, everything seems to speak. The tablet does not separate mind, house, city, and cosmos as cleanly as modern thought often does. A nightmare may belong to the body, but also to a spirit. A ruined wall may be bad construction, but also divine displeasure. A dead relative may be memory, but also presence. The world is layered, and the layers touch. Scholars continue to debate how literally ordinary Sumerians imagined these accounts. Some argue that mythic descriptions reflect temple literature rather than everyday belief. Others think they reveal assumptions widely shared in family practice, burial customs, and ritual duty. The difficulty is obvious. Texts preserve elite scribal voices. While most people left no written explanation of what they believed when they wept beside a grave, the silence of the poor is one of history's oldest problems. You turn another fragment in your mind, its broken surface preserves a divine name and a place below. The missing parts seem almost louder than the words. You want the tablet to tell you exactly what happens at death. It refuses. Instead, it offers you images arranged around a void. There is darkness. There is descent. There is hunger. There is memory. There is law. A door creaks somewhere in the study room, and the sound becomes, for a moment, the sound of an ancient gate. The Sumerian imagination loved thresholds, city gates, temple gates, house doors, sealed jars, wombs, graves, and underworld entrances all carry the same quiet force. To cross is to change condition. To pass through a gate is to be counted differently. That matters deeply for the soul, or the shade, or whatever name you give the surviving presence. At death, a person does not merely stop, a person transfers. The living body becomes a corpse, the remembered person becomes an ancestor, or perhaps a ghost. The visible household becomes linked to an invisible dwelling. The name remains above, while the shadow goes below. It is not one transformation. It is several. You sense why the scribes preserved these stories. They were not simply entertaining tales about gods. They were maps of anxiety. They taught that descent has stages, that the lower world has authorities, and that no one enters death as casually as someone stepping into shade. Even divine beings must follow rules there. That's a terrifying idea, gently stated. If even gods must obey the underworld, what chance does a human have of bargaining with it? The fragments give no easy comfort, but they do provide shape. Shape itself can soothe. A grief with no form becomes endless fog. A grief with gates, names, offerings, and duties becomes something the living can approach. You may not defeat death, but you can carry water. You may not return the dead to sunlight, but you can keep their name from drying out. Your gaze lowers again to the signs. Wedge follows, wedge. The old script looks abstract at first, yet it came from hands, reeds, clay, and breath. A scribe leaned over this surface. Someone taught him the story. Someone corrected his signs. Someone believed the words mattered enough to copy. Perhaps that is the hidden tenderness inside every broken tablet. It survives because someone once refused to let a voice disappear. Outside, imagine night gathers over the ruins. In the museum room, the light remains steady. The tablet does not glow. It does not reveal a secret in one clean sentence. It simply rests there, damaged and stubborn, offering fragments of a vast underworld dream. You listen to what remains. You listen to what is missing. And in that quiet space between mark and absence, the Sumerian dead begin to seem less like distant figures from a forgotten civilization, and more like people still waiting for someone patient enough to hear them. The path turns toward a story that does not behave like an ordinary story. It begins with a goddess, bright with authority, clothed in powers that belong to heaven and kingship. Yet her road bends downward, away from open air, away from music, away from the voices that praise her name. She does not drift into the lower world by accident. She chooses to go. You feel the scene open like a stone door. Inanna, queen of desire, battle, and terrible beauty, prepares for descent. She gathers her sacred powers, the signs of office that make her more than a figure walking through dust. She dresses herself in splendor. A crown rests upon her head. Jewels lie at her throat. Fine garments cover her body. Each ornament is not merely decoration. Each is a symbol of rank, protection, and command. The underworld does not admire her for it. That is the first cold lesson. Sumerian literary tradition preserves the famous tale of Inanna's descent into the realm below, one of the richest surviving accounts of movement between life's world and death's domain. Scholars at major universities have studied its versions, language, and ritual echoes for generations, because it shows the underworld as a power with its own laws. Even a goddess must submit to those laws. Especially a goddess. Perhaps. You walk beside her in imagination, though no mortal body could follow safely. The air changes. The warmth of the city thins. The smell of baked brick gives way to damp clay and mineral cold. Sounds seem to fall behind you, as if the upper world is being folded shut. There is no birdsong and there is no market laughter. There is only the steady approach to the first gate. At the gate stands a keeper. He does not tremble. This is important. Inanna is not treated as a visiting celebrity, which must have been very disappointing for her divine confidence. The gatekeeper asks questions. The Queen of Heaven must explain herself. The lower world is not a disorderly cave. It has officials, boundaries, commands, and protocol. The dead may be powerless, but the place itself is not. A door opens. Something is taken. At the first gate, part of her glory is removed. At the second, another sign is stripped away. Gate by gate, the descent continues. Crown, necklace, beads, breast ornament, measuring rod, garment, and final covering are removed in sequence. By the end, she stands exposed, emptied of the symbols that made her mighty above. The movement is slow and ritualized. Nothing is rushed. That slowness gives the story its force. Death, in this myth, is not a single blow. It is a gradual unmaking of status. You lose the signs by which the world recognized you. You lose the objects that announced your place. You lose the gestures of command. At last, even divine identity is made vulnerable before the deeper order. You may feel a quiet discomfort in that. It is not the discomfort of violence alone. It is the discomfort of being reduced. What happens to the soul at death may begin with subtraction. The body loses warmth. The household loses a voice. The person loses public role. The name remains. But even the name must be carried by others. Inanna's story takes that human fear and magnifies it through divine drama. If she must be stripped before entering, then perhaps everyone must arrive below without their carefully arranged surfaces. The king without his throne, the merchant without his accounts, the beauty without admiration, the loud man without his listeners. Imagine the tragedy. Or perhaps the relief. The underworld refuses flattery. The goddess reaches the throne room of Ereshkigal, the formidable queen below. Here the tale becomes denser, stranger, and more unsettling. Ereshkigal is not merely a monster in darkness. She is a ruler. She belongs to the place in a way Inanna does not. She presides over the realm from which mortals do not return, and her authority is ancient, severe, and rooted beneath the visible world. A mainstream historical point rests beneath this mythic scene. Sumerian religion did not place all divine power in the sky. The gods belonged to distinct domains, and the underworld had its own sovereign force. Death was not simply the absence of life. It was a territory governed by beings who possessed legitimacy within that territory. That makes the descent more than a journey. It is a confrontation between powers. At the centre, Inanna is judged or fixed by the deadly gaze of those below. The language varies by version and interpretation, but the result is stark. She's turned into a corpse and hung up, inert, powerless, suspended in the house of death. The living goddess becomes an object within the realm she tried to enter. The image is quiet and terrible. No thunder is needed. A quirky strand of interpretation has always gathered around this myth. Some modern readers have seen it as a secret code for the planet Venus, disappearing from the evening sky and returning as the morning star. Since Inanna was associated with that brilliant wandering light, the idea is tempting. Scholars treat it carefully because myth, ritual, astronomy, and politics may overlap without reducing one another completely. Still, you can understand the fascination. A goddess vanishes, then returns, a bright star sinks, then rises. Ancient people were not blind to the sky. They watched it with patience. Yet the myth's emotional power does not depend on astronomy. You feel it in the body, the walk downward, the gate, the removal, the silence. the still form of the goddess in a place that does not care how powerful she was above. Some researchers continue to debate whether Inanna's descent reflects funerary ritual, seasonal renewal, royal ideology, or a dramatic exploration of divine boundaries. One school emphasizes death and return, another emphasizes the danger of crossing domains, another sees the narrative as a ritual pattern of stripping and restoration. The story permits all of these, while refusing to become only one of them. That refusal is part of its beauty. For the question of the soul, the tale offers something indirect but profound. It suggests that identity is layered. You're not only your body, you're also your clothing, your office, your relationships, your name, your signs of dignity, and the powers others recognize in you. When death comes, those layers are peeled away. What remains must face a realm where earthly markers no longer command obedience. The soul then may not simply fly away, it may be processed. That word sounds modern and rather rude, like paperwork after a funeral. Yet Sumer would have understood the seriousness of processing. Grain is measured, offerings are counted, labour is assigned, temples are provisioned, gates are guarded. Why should death be less organised than barley? Inanna's descent tells you that the lower world is not persuaded by beauty or volume. It answers to older rules. Even divinity must be transformed at the threshold. The road below is not a stage for self-expression. It is a place where every borrowed sign is returned. You stand now in that imagined corridor of gates, with darkness ahead and the memory of sunlight behind. On the ground, dust lies untouched. On the walls, no painted welcome appears. The gatekeeper waits without excitement. He has seen grandeur before. Grandeur always seems surprised to meet a closed door. There is gentle sarcasm in the universe sometimes. Inanna's fate does not end in permanent silence. But that is not the lesson being unfolded here. The focus rests on the descent itself, the slow surrender of power before the domain of the dead. The soul's path is not described through comfort, but through order. It is not a cheerful promise. It is a ceremony of loss. You breathe slowly. The air is cold at the last gate. Nothing decorative remains. The goddess has become almost like the dead she came to confront. That is the strange mercy of the myth. It tells the living that no one enters the hidden realm untouched. Not even the radiant queen who once stood above cities and battlefields. And somewhere beneath the old clay world, the gates seem to close behind her, one by one, until all that remains is the silence of a power older than pride. The lower world opens without sunlight, and you sense at once that it is not a wilderness. It has shape, it has chambers, passages, rulers, attendants, and customs older than any living city. It does not need to burn or roar to be frightening. Its power comes from stillness, from permanence, from the feeling that every footstep is expected. You stand at the edge of the land of no return. There is no bright riverbank ahead, no garden with sweet fruit waiting in soft air. The Sumerian underworld is imagined as a dim realm beneath the earth, a place entered by the dead and governed by powers who do not bargain easily. The phrase, often translated as the land of no return, carries a heavy certainty. It does not say the dead are punished for every sin. It says they are removed from ordinary return. That is quieter. It may be worse. The air around you feels close and mineral, as though the earth itself has a breath. You smell damp clay, old ash, and something like stale grain kept too long in a sealed jar. The floor is firm, but not comforting. There are no fields here, only the memory of fields. There are no rooftops, only the idea of enclosure. Sound arrives softly and disappears quickly, swallowed by walls that do not echo with life. A mainstream historical fact sits beneath this imagined geography. Sumerian and later Mesopotamian texts commonly picture the realm of the dead as below the living world, not above it. The living world rests under sky, temple, and wind, while the dead occupy a shadowed depth. This vertical imagination is not unique to Sumer, but Sumer gives it a stark, early form in surviving literature. You move carefully, not because something leaps at you, but because nothing does. The underworld's silence feels administrative. It has the patience of a place where every arrival has already been counted. A new ghost does not surprise the staff. That is almost insulting. Really. You spend a lifetime becoming yourself, and the underworld receives you like one more delivery at a side entrance. A low gate stands behind you, though you cannot say when it closed. Ahead, the path broadens into a grey interior. Figures move in the distance, but they do not hurry. Their outlines are indistinct. They are not bodies as the living know bodies. They resemble presences, shades, weakened shapes of persons still carrying the outline of their former selves. The Sumerians did not give us a modern scientific chart of this place. They gave us scenes, names, titles, and poetic glimpses. Still, these glimpses form a pattern. The dead go downward. They enter a fixed realm. They live in diminished condition. They remain connected to the living through offerings, funerary rites, and memory. Their existence continues, but it is not the kind of continuation a tired person would book for a holiday. This is no luxury afterlife. It is more like a shadow household. That phrase helps you feel the world beneath the world. A household has rules, ranks, supplies, and obligations. The underworld is not empty because its inhabitants are dead. It is full in a different way, arranged according to laws that living people can only partly understand. There are thrones below, servants below, scribes below, and perhaps even records below. Death does not erase hierarchy. It translates it into a colder language. You notice a strange detail in the old imagination. The dead are often described as wearing feathers or being clothed like birds in some related Mesopotamian texts. The image feels almost dreamlike. Why feathers? Perhaps it suggests ghostly lightness. Perhaps it marks them as beings no longer walking the upper streets in ordinary garments. Or perhaps an ancient poet simply found the image perfect. And honestly, poets have caused much confusion that way. Modern scholars debate the precise relationship between Sumerian descriptions and later, Akkadian versions of the underworld. Some see continuity, with older ideas reshaped into new languages and literary forms. Others caution that later texts cannot always be projected backward without care. This matters because the land of no return was not a single, frozen doctrine. It evolved as stories passed through scribal schools, royal courts, and ritual traditions. The dead realm changes as the living change, yet its emotional centre remains steady. It is the place beneath choice. A living person may choose a road, a trade, a spouse, a prayer, a lie, a meal, a song, or a quarrel. The dead have crossed into a region where choice narrows. They exist, but under conditions set by powers beyond persuasion. You hear a faint shuffling somewhere to the left. It might be sandals, or dry reeds moving in windless air. A figure passes carrying a bowl, though you cannot tell whether it is full. Another crouches in darkness, its head lowered. A third seems to listen toward the upper world, as if waiting for a name to be spoken. Their stillness has personality, which makes it sadder. This is one of the more unsettling Sumerian possibilities. The dead are not annihilated, but neither are they free. They are aware enough to lack. They remain enough to need. The soul, or shade, keeps a reduced identity, and reduction may be its own kind of suffering. Perhaps the underworld frightens because it preserves you incompletely. The living often fear disappearance. Sumer offers a different fear. You may continue, but in a form dependent, dim, and hungry for remembrance. Your voice may weaken. Your status may fade. Your comfort may rely on those who still wake under the sun. Death becomes not a cliff, but a slow relocation into need. You pass through a hall where the walls seem made of packed darkness. In your mind, inscriptions flicker without being readable. The Sumerian texts do not linger on personal reunion in a sentimental way. They do not promise that every beloved face will rush forward with music. They are more restrained, more severe. The dead belong to a collective below, gathered into the vast house where all roads end. This makes the living world more precious. A bowl of barley porridge, a breeze through reeds, the scratch of a stylus, the laughter of someone washing at a canal, a child complaining about chores with impressive dedication. These small irritations belong to sunlight. Even annoyance is a privilege of breath. The underworld receives no dawn. No season ripens there. Time may pass, but it does not bloom. It sits. It accumulates. It thickens around the shades like dust on an unused threshold. The land of no return is not only a destination. It is a condition of being outside renewal. You begin to understand why offerings mattered so deeply. If the lower world is fixed, then gifts from above become tiny movements across the boundary. Water poured by a son or daughter becomes more than water. It becomes contact. Bread placed in a ritual setting becomes more than food. It becomes proof that the dead have not been abandoned to the general dimness. The underworld is vast, but memory can still enter it. Perhaps that is the tender loophole. You stand now in the hush of that hidden land, with its gates behind you and its rulers somewhere ahead. The Sumerian soul does not soar beyond the stars in this vision. It descends into a realm older than cities, beneath the canals, beneath the floor where families sleep, beneath the foundations of temples raised to heaven. The thought is heavy, but not empty. The dead continue. They continue in shadow, in order, in need, in memory. They are gathered into a place where return is forbidden, but relationship is not entirely cut away, and so the land of no return waits below every bright courtyard, patient as clay, silent as sealed jars, and close enough that the living can almost hear it when the house grows still. A bowl is placed near the threshold, and the gesture is almost too small to notice. A little water, a little bread, perhaps dates, beer, oil, or a portion from the family meal. Nothing grand enough for a king's inscription, nothing polished enough for a museum display. Yet in the Sumerian imagination, such small offerings may reach farther than monuments. You watch a hand lower the bowl carefully. The hand belongs to someone living. The gift belongs to someone dead. Between them lies the difficult border where grief becomes duty, and duty becomes a form of love. The dead cannot come upstairs and complain politely about neglect, although some traditions suggest they might manage something less polite in dreams. Still, the living act as though the departed remain capable of receiving, needing, and suffering. The Sumerian dead are often imagined as existing in a diminished state. Their food is not the warm bread of the upper world. Their drink is not drawn freely from shining canals. Their realm is associated with dust, darkness, and scarcity. When texts speak of dust as food and clay as sustenance, the image is not meant to comfort. It gives the afterlife a dry taste in your mouth. Dust is daily bread. It is a terrible little meal. Yet the image is also revealing. It suggests that the dead continue in an environment where ordinary nourishment has failed. The body that once chewed, swallowed, desired, and worked is gone from sunlight. What remains below receives only a shadow of provision, unless the living send care across the boundary through ritual attention. A mainstream historical fact rests within this practice. Archaeology and textual evidence from ancient Mesopotamia show that funerary offerings were part of social and religious life. Graves might contain vessels, food remains, ornaments, tools, or items that suggest preparation for a continued existence. The exact meaning of each object is debated, but the pattern shows concern for the dead beyond simple disposal of a body. You step inside the house where the offering has been placed. The room is low and warm. Smoke from a lamp curls against the ceiling. A woven basket leans beside a wall. Barley grains cling to the edge of a grinding stone. The living have very little extra, yet some portion is set aside for one who no longer labours. That choice matters. In a difficult agricultural world, food is never merely symbolic. It is time, water, muscle, planning, harvest, storage, and risk. To give food to the dead is to spend part of the living world on the unseen. It is faith expressed through household accounting, which may be the most Mesopotamian thing imaginable. Even the afterlife gets a supply problem. The dead, in this worldview, are not only spiritual beings, they are dependents. That word feels cold, but it is useful. Like infants, elders, servants, animals, fields, and gods. The dead occupy a place in the network of provision. They do not produce in the ordinary sense, but they may bless, trouble, protect, or accuse. They continue to matter because the household's order includes them. You notice how different this is from imagining death as a private journey. The Sumerian afterlife is social. A person's condition below depends partly on relationships above. A well-remembered ancestor may receive offerings and rest with greater ease. A neglected ghost may become hungry and bitter. The living are therefore not spectators. They are participants in the condition of the dead. That is a heavy responsibility to leave to relatives. Anyone who has planned a family meal understands the danger. A quirky fragment of Mesopotamian belief suggests that ghosts could be irritated by improper burial, lack of offerings, or unresolved matters. Later incantation texts include procedures for dealing with troublesome spirits, including those who intrude into dreams or illness. It is easy to smile at the idea of a ghost filing complaints through nightmares. Yet beneath the strangeness lies an ancient emotional truth. The uncared for dead do not stay politely quiet in the mind. They return as worry. They return as guilt. They return as stories told at dusk. Scholars continue to discuss how much these rituals reflect fear, affection, social control, or genuine ancestor reverence. Some emphasize the emotional bond between family members across death. Others point to the practical role of ritual in maintaining household continuity and inheritance. Another line of thought sees offerings as a way to keep potentially dangerous spirits satisfied, which is less sentimental, but very believable. Love and caution often share the same bowl. The dead receive because they are cherished. The dead receive because they are feared. The dead receive because order requires it. You listen to the quiet splash of water being poured. In a land where irrigation determines survival, water is never a casual symbol. It is life itself, guided through canals, measured by labour, threatened by drought, flood, and neglect. To pour water for a dead person is to send a small river into the dark. Perhaps the soul drinks memory in liquid form. No tablet says it so neatly, of course. Ancient texts rarely behave like helpful modern summaries. Still, the feeling emerges from many scattered practices. The dead need attention, the living provide. The boundary between worlds can be crossed by ritual, not by rescue. No one pulls the dead back into daylight, but one may soften their condition below. The scent of beer rises faintly from a jar. Beer in Sumer was ordinary, nourishing, thick, and important. It belonged to labour rations, feasts, temples, and households. If offered to the dead, it carried the taste of daily life into the underworld. Not luxury, not escape, something familiar. That familiarity may be the kindness. The soul at death does not become abstract in this world. It remains connected to bread, water, name, kin, and place. It is not a pure idea floating above history. It is the continuation of a person once embedded in material life. The same person who used a cup, crossed a courtyard, ate from a bowl, and recognized a voice now depends on those things in altered form. You feel the rough floor beneath your feet. Somewhere below it, a burial may rest. The house is not haunted in the dramatic sense. It is layered. Living breath moves above the stillness of the dead. The evening meal unfolds above the memory of austere meals. A child grows where an ancestor was placed. The household becomes a vertical archive. This arrangement makes every meal slightly sacred. It also makes every neglect slightly dangerous. A name forgotten may become a kind of second death. A vessel left empty may suggest abandonment. A family line broken by war, disease, migration, or poverty may leave the dead without voices above. In this way, the Sumerian afterlife exposes the fragility of human continuation. You do not live only through biology, you live through care. Perhaps that is why the image of dust feels so severe. Dust is what remains when structure breaks down. Brick becomes dust. Bodies become dust. Fields without water become dust. Names without memory become dust. To feed on dust is to exist at the edge of disappearance, still present, but no longer nourished by full human connection. The lamp flickers, the bowl waits. A mourner sits beside it, shoulders lowered, saying little. There is no need for grand speech. The act itself speaks in the older language of need and reply. The dead have gone where sunlight does not reach. The living send what they can. It is not enough to undo death. It may be enough to honour it. You sense the strange balance at the heart of Sumerian belief. The afterlife is bleak, yet not empty of relationship. The soul is weakened, yet not meaningless. The underworld is closed, yet small gifts pass its border. A cup of water becomes a message. A piece of bread becomes a thread. A spoken name becomes a hand extended into darkness. And in the soft hush of the house, as the living finally sleep and the offering remains near the threshold, you understand why dust could be daily bread for the dead, unless love, memory, and ritual gave them something gentler to receive. A chamber waits below the earth, not empty, not wild, not lawless. In the dimness, authority sits with a patience that makes noise feel foolish. You sense figures gathered where no sunlight falls, beings whose work is not to comfort the newly dead, but to place them within an order older than memory. The underworld has judges. That thought changes the darkness. A world without judges is frightening because anything may happen. A world with judges is frightening because something formal may happen. The Sumerian imagination leans toward the second fear. The dead descend into a realm where divine powers record, decide, and maintain boundaries. Death is not merely a drifting away. It is an arrival before powers who know the rules, even when humans do not. You picture a hall of packed shadow. The air smells of damp stone, cold clay, and extinguished lamps. There are no windows, because what would a window show down here? There are no birds, no river glare, no bright courtyard where someone laughs too loudly over bread. Only stillness. And within that stillness, a system. At the centre of that system stands a Reshkigol, queen of the great below. She is not a wandering demon, not a careless terror, and certainly not a decorative villain waiting for a hero to interrupt her schedule. She is sovereign. Her realm is death, and her authority within it is not borrowed from the sky. It belongs below, rooted like a buried foundation. Ancient Mesopotamian texts preserve her name as the ruler of the dead, and later traditions continue to place her at the centre of underworld power. This is a mainstream historical fact that matters deeply. The Sumerians did not imagine death as a vacant pit. They imagined it as a kingdom, or a household, or a court, governed by divine authority. A court requires attendance. A court requires witnesses. A court requires decisions. Around a Reshkiel move other figures, some clearer in the texts, some fading at the edges. The Inanna, a group of great divine beings, appear in underworld scenes as judges or powers associated with decree. They do not step forward as friendly guides with reassuring smiles. They belong to the machinery of cosmic order. Their presence suggests that what happens to the dead is observed, weighed, and fixed within divine structure. You hear no shouting. That is the unsettling part. The judges below do not need to raise their voices. Their silence has more force than anger. A decree in the underworld does not require drama. It simply becomes true. The soul, or shade, arrives in this environment already diminished. It has lost the warmth of the body, the protection of household walls, and the easy authority of being seen by the living. Now it must be recognized by powers who do not care for excuses. The underworld has its own clerks, in a sense, and they are not likely to misplace your file out of kindness. There is the gentle sarcasm of death again. Even eternity has administration. A remarkable feature of Mesopotamian religious thought is its interest in divine record-keeping. The gods decree fates. Scribes record transactions, offerings, omens, and names in the upper world, while divine scribal figures appear in mythic contexts as keepers of destiny and order. The habit of writing shaped how people imagined power. To be written down was to be fixed, acknowledged, and made part of the system. For a living person, writing could secure property, labour, law, tribute, or praise. For the dead, perhaps memory itself became a kind of entry in a cosmic register. A name spoken above and a fate fixed below may belong to the same old instinct. Existence needs inscription, otherwise it frays. You move closer to the imagined court. The floor is hard beneath your bare feet. Somewhere, water drips once, then stops. You feel the presence of beings who are not cruel in a human way. They are worse than cruel. Perhaps they are official. They do what the realm requires. This distinction matters. The Sumerian underworld is not presented primarily as a place where moral crimes are punished one by one. Like a tidy classroom with very severe teachers, its bleakness is more universal. Yet judgment still appears as process, classification, and decree. The dead are not free agents below. They are placed. Modern scholars continue to debate how far moral judgment shaped early Sumerian afterlife beliefs. Some argue that status, burial, and ritual care mattered more than ethical reward or punishment. Others point to later Mesopotamian developments and legal imagery as evidence that conduct could influence post-mortem expectations. The question remains delicate, because fragments do not always reveal the whole architecture of belief. The tablets give shadows, not charts. Still, the presence of judges tells you something profound. Death is not meaningless in these texts. A person enters a realm where identity is handled by powers greater than family grief. The living may feed the dead, mourn the dead, and remember the dead, but they do not control the entire outcome. Below the household duty lies a divine structure. That structure may have comforted some people. It may have terrified others. You imagine a newly arrived shade standing before the court. Perhaps it still carries confusion from the final breath. Perhaps it reaches instinctively for a garment that is no longer there, or for a voice that cannot answer. The judges do not ask whether the shade feels ready. Readiness belongs to the living. Arrival belongs to death. The divine powers see what must be seen. They assign what must be assigned. The underworld receives another inhabitant, and the order holds. A quirky tradition connected to Mesopotamian thought gives special importance to dreams and omens as possible messages from beyond ordinary perception. A dream of the dead might not be dismissed as imagination. It could be examined, interpreted, and treated as meaningful. To modern ears, that can sound wonderfully inconvenient. Imagine waking from a strange dream and realizing the universe may expect paperwork, purification, and perhaps an apology. Yet such beliefs show how thin the boundary felt. The judges below may remain hidden, but their decisions could ripple upward through signs, illness, dreams, and ritual unease. The lower court does not sit in public, yet the living world feels its draft beneath the door. You notice that these divine figures are not sentimental. They do not promise that love alone overrules death. They do not promise that grief becomes reunion by force of desire. Instead, they present a sterner wisdom. Life belongs to one order. Death belongs to another. The transition between them must be governed, because boundaries without guardians invite chaos. This may explain why ancient stories place such stress on gates, attendants, and decrees. A gate without a keeper is only a hole. A realm without judges is only a space. The Sumerian underworld is neither. It is an institution of the cosmos, dark but organized, grim but stable. Your breathing slows as the hall widens around you. There is no throne glittering with gold here, at least not in the way palaces glitter above. The grandeur below is older, colder, and less dependent on display. Authority does not need decoration when every mortal must eventually enter its jurisdiction. That realization settles gently. No one escapes the summons, not the builder of temples, not the singer of hymns, not the merchant guarding silver, not the child chasing beetles near a canal. All may have different graves, different mourners, different offerings, and different names. But the lower order waits beneath every path. The judges below are therefore not only characters in a myth, they are the shape of inevitability. They personify the truth that death has rules beyond human preference. The soul at death is not simply released into whatever it desires. It is received by a system, and that system existed long before the person arrived. You stand in the chamber and feel the immense calm of it. The dead may hunger, the living may weep, offerings may be poured, names may be remembered. Yet beneath all those tender acts, the divine court remains, measuring what cannot be negotiated and preserving the order of the great below. The silence gathers again. It is not empty silence. It is the silence of a decree already spoken, still unfolding through every grave, every house, every tablet, and every human breath that will one day become still. A voice rises from beneath the earth, and it is not quite a voice anymore. It is thinner than speech, colder than breath, yet still shaped by memory. You hear it as though it comes through packed soil, through cracked clay, through the hollow places below a ruined city. It belongs to Enkidu, companion of Gilgamesh, whose friendship once moved through wild steppe, cedar forest, palace court, and grief. Now it moves through darkness. The tale is strange, because it does not simply describe death from the outside. It allows the dead to speak. For a moment, the boundary loosens. Gilgamesh, restless and wounded by loss, seeks knowledge no living person should comfortably possess. He wants to know what happens below. He wants details. Humans always want details when mystery has hurt them. The old story grants him an answer, but not a soothing one. You find yourself in Uruk, where walls rise broad and sun-baked above the plain. The city is proud, heavy with gates and brickwork, alive with labour and noise. Yet pride cannot protect a king from mourning. Gilgamesh has already learned that power does not prevent death. His friend, once strong enough to face monsters beside him, has gone into the world beneath. The king remains above, breathing, angry, and terribly awake. A mainstream historical fact stands behind this scene. The stories of Gilgamesh developed through Sumerian poems and later Akkadian tradition, making them among the most influential literary works from ancient Mesopotamia. Scholars at universities such as Yale, Oxford, and Chicago have studied their language, transmission, and changing form. The character moves across centuries, but his grief remains immediate. That is why the story endures. Not because he is mighty, but because he is bereaved. In one Sumerian composition, often known through the episode involving the underworld, Enkidu's spirit is allowed to rise and describe conditions below. The moment feels almost like a forbidden interview. Gilgamesh asks questions, and the dead companion answers with rules that are practical, grim, and oddly domestic. The afterlife is not shown as a single grand vision. It is explained through cases. What happens to the man with one son? What happens to the man with many sons? What happens to the man whose body lies unburied? What happens to the one who has no one to make offerings? The answers reveal a world where social ties matter after death. The dead man with many sons is better cared for, because many descendants can provide offerings. The one without descendants suffers. The unburied dead are restless or deprived. The person whose body is abandoned does not join the settled dead with ease. These are not abstract theological principles. They are family arrangements carried into the grave. You You can almost hear Gilgamesh listening harder. His questions are desperate. The dead explain that the afterlife's condition is shaped by burial, remembrance, and descendants. That detail strikes with quiet force. A king may build walls, defeat enemies, and command labour, but even he must confront the small household truth beneath grandeur. Someone must care for you when you can no longer speak. The body matters too. The Sumerian imagination does not treat the corpse as irrelevant packaging, which is a very modern little insult to the material world. Proper burial affects the shade's place and peace. To be left exposed, lost, or forgotten is not merely physically unpleasant, it is spiritually dangerous. The path below needs social recognition, ritual handling, and placement. You stand near the Great Wall of Uruk, though your attention turns inward. The clay bricks are warm under the last light. Dust gathers in the joints. The river beyond the city glimmers with slow bronze colour. Somewhere, a funeral procession moves quietly through a lane. Somewhere else, a child runs past with complete indifference to mortality, which is exactly what children are designed to do. Yet the old poem insists that mortality is never far away. It lies just beneath friendship. It waits beneath heroic adventure. It stands at the edge of laughter. Enkidu, once the wild man brought into civilization, becomes the messenger from the country no warrior can conquer. A quirky detail in the broader Gilgamesh tradition is how often the heroic and the embarrassingly human sit together. Gilgamesh battles monsters, seeks eternal life, and questions cosmic limits. He also panics, complains, and behaves like a sleep-deprived person who has discovered philosophy at the worst possible hour. There is something very believable in that. Grief rarely makes anyone dignified for long. The underworld report given by Enkidu is not poetry of comfort. It is social instruction disguised as a ghostly conversation. The listener learns that children are not only heirs, they are ritual continuers. A son or daughter may keep a parent's condition from worsening in the below. Family, then, becomes a bridge built from food, water, and repeated names. Modern scholars debate how these passages should be read. Some see them as evidence of actual funerary belief, preserved through narrative. Others suggest that they also promote social values, especially marriage, children, proper burial, and continuity of household lines. A more cautious view holds both together. Literature can reveal belief while teaching behaviour, because ancient stories were rarely polite enough to do only one job. That may be why this episode feels so alive. It frightens and instructs at once. Enkidu's words imply that the dead are sorted not simply by virtue, but by the care surrounding their death and memory. A person with descendants eats better below. A neglected person suffers more. The moral universe here is not centered only on private goodness. It is entangled with kinship, ritual, and material attention. To modern ears, this can feel unfair. What of the kind person with no children? What of the worker lost in floodwater? What of the poor, the stranger, the prisoner, the traveller, the infant? The old texts do not always soften such questions. They expose the anxiety. They let the fear stand where you can see it. The forgotten dead are vulnerable. The remembered dead endure differently. Gilgamesh hears this from the one person whose testimony matters most to him. Not a priest, not a scribe, not a confident lecturer with excellent posture. His friend, the one he loved, the one whose absence has made the world unbearable. That is why the scene reaches beyond doctrine. It becomes the terrible intimacy of asking the dead whether they are all right. You may know that question in your own quiet way. Not as a king, not beneath Uruk's walls, but in the small hours, when a name returns and the room seems too still. Are you at peace? Are you somewhere? Do you need anything from me? The Sumerian answer is not clear comfort. It is responsibility. Care for the body. Speak the name. Maintain the offerings. Continue the household line if the world allows it. Do not assume death ends relationship. Do not imagine forgetting is harmless. A faint wind moves along the imagined wall. The city darkens. Gilgamesh remains above. But part of him has descended through listening. That is what grief does. It leaves the body in daylight while sending the mind below, searching for any report from the one who has crossed. Enkidu's ghost does not give him paradise, as it gives him rules. Rules can be cold. They can also be merciful. A rule means there is something to do. Bring water. Arrange burial. Remember the dead. Give them a place in speech, not merely in sorrow, against the vastness of mortality. These gestures may seem small, but Sumerian thought gives them weight enough to cross worlds. The voice from below grows faint. It cannot stay. The boundary tightens again, as boundaries always do. Gilgamesh remains with his questions, but now the underworld has acquired detail. It is not only darkness, it is a realm where family care, burial, and remembrance shape the fate of the shade, and you remain with him for a moment in the cooling city, hearing the last trace of Enkidu's answer sink back through the earth, leaving behind the old human duty to listen, to mourn, and to keep feeding the dead with memory. The earth at Ur does not open like a wound. It opens like a memory being carefully uncovered, layer by layer. Baskets of soil rise from the pit, and sunlight falls on objects that have not seen morning for thousands of years. Gold catches the light first, then lapis lazuli, then shell, silver, wood darkened by age, and the faint shapes of bodies arranged in ceremonial stillness. You stand at the edge of the royal cemetery. The air is dry. Dust clings to the tongue. Workers move slowly, because every careless gesture may destroy what time is barely allowed to survive. A brush passes over a bead. A trowel lifts compacted soil from the curve of a vessel. A skull appears, then another. The silence deepens, not because no one is present, but because everyone understands that presence has become delicate. Ur was one of the great cities of southern Mesopotamia, and its royal cemetery revealed some of the most extraordinary burials known from the early 3rd millennium before the Common Era. Excavations led by Leonard Woolley uncovered richly furnished graves containing precious materials, musical instruments, vehicles, weapons, vessels, and attendants placed with the dead. The finds transformed modern understanding of elite death in ancient Sumer. That mainstream fact is astonishing enough without decoration. Then the details begin. A queen lies with ornaments of gold and stone arranged around her body. A headdress of leaves and flowers rests where hair once was. Nearby are attendants, musicians, guards, and servants, positioned as though part of a final procession that never ended. A lyre decorated with a bull's head waits in the dust, its wooden body mostly gone, its image still powerful. The scene feels theatrical, but it is not a stage. It is a grave. You look down into the pit and feel the question gather. Did they go willingly? No answer arrives cleanly. The royal tombs suggest a belief that status continued beyond death, or at least that the dead king or queen required a household, court, and equipment in the next realm. A ruler did not descend alone. They carried signs of rank, wealth, music, movement, and service into the lower world. The underworld may be bleak, but social imagination did not suddenly become equal when elites planned burials. Very convenient for elites, naturally. A little sarcasm seems justified. The Sumerian city depended on hierarchy. Kings, queens, priests, administrators, craftspeople, farmers, labourers, and slaves lived within an ordered society. That order shaped not only life, but the arrangements made for death. The royal graves at Ur make this visible with unusual force. In ordinary households, a bowl and burial might sustain family remembrance. In royal contexts, death became public display, political statement, and cosmic preparation. The soul of a ruler, if such a word is used carefully, didn't enter the below as a private shadow. It entered with identity amplified by ceremony. Precious stones from distant lands, metals requiring trade and labour, carved instruments, and sacrificed retainers all declared that this person's status would not be allowed to dissolve quietly. The tomb became a last palace, built downward. You imagine the funeral procession at dusk. Torches smoke, drums beat softly, not loudly, because the dead need rhythm more than noise. A queen's attendants wear fine ornaments. Musicians carry instruments that catch the last red light. The smell of oil, wool, incense, and human fear mixes in the air. The crowd watches from a distance, aware that the ceremony is both sacred and dangerous. Then the procession descends. The earth receives them. Some studies of the royal cemetery have suggested that the attendants may have consumed a substance before death, perhaps to quiet fear or produce sleep. Other researchers have questioned the exact circumstances, methods, and interpretations. The scholarly debate remains open because the bones and objects speak through damage, preservation, and context rather than confession. Archaeology often gives evidence without granting emotional certainty. That uncertainty may be the most haunting part. It is one thing to imagine mythic descent. It is another to see human bodies arranged in a tomb, their final positions preserved by soil. Each attendant had a name once. Each had a childhood, a mother's voice, a habit of standing, a favourite taste, perhaps a grievance about breakfast. History often compresses them into the phrase attendants, which is efficient and rather brutal. You linger near the lyre. Its bullhead gleams in reconstruction, with lapis beard and shell inlay. Music went into the grave. That detail softens and unsettles at once. Did the dead need songs below? Did the living imagine that the court of a ruler must remain elegant, even in darkness? Or was the instrument a sign for those above, declaring splendour at the moment of loss? Perhaps all of these are true. Funerary objects rarely mean only one thing. A quirky fringe idea sometimes attached to the royal cemetery imagines the tombs as evidence for lost visitors from the stars, because gold, lapis, and ceremonial death apparently cannot be left in peace by modern fantasy. The real explanation is far more human and, frankly, more disturbing. Complex societies can organise beauty, devotion, coercion, and death without help from the sky. People are quite capable of grandeur and horror on their own. The graves reveal a world where the afterlife is not merely imagined. It is materially staged. The tomb becomes a constructed passage, a prepared environment, an argument made in objects. The dead ruler's identity is packed into the earth with goods and bodies, as though the lower world must be furnished before arrival. You feel the weight of those objects. Gold is not just gold. It is mining, trade, skill, control, desire, and authority. Lapis lazuli travelled from far mountains, crossing great distances before resting in a Sumerian grave. Shell came from waters beyond the city's immediate world. The tomb gathers geography into death. It says that a powerful person's reach extended across land, river, craft, and human labour. Even burial becomes empire in miniature. The soul's fate, then, cannot be separated from society. Sumerian texts may describe dust and darkness below, but elite archaeology shows that the living tried to influence that darkness with wealth. Perhaps the goods were meant for use. Perhaps they were gifts to gods. Perhaps they were symbols of earthly rank carried into cosmic memory. Perhaps they reassured the living that power remained intact, even when the ruler's body cooled. You kneel beside an imagined graveshaft. The soil gives off a dry smell, faintly metallic where ancient objects lie. The sun above feels too bright for what is being revealed. A worker's brush uncovers beads still in rows around a vanished neck. Their colours remain, while the flesh they adorned has disappeared. Beauty survives. The wearer does not. That is one of archaeology's cruel jokes. Or its mercy. The royal cemetery forces you to face the difference between body, identity, and display. The body decays. The identity is preserved through names, objects, ritual, and memory. The display remains legible to strangers thousands of years later. You do not know the full inner life of the queen or king, but you know they were treated as important at death. Importance itself has become evidence, yet the attendants complicate every easy interpretation. If they were sacrificed to accompany a ruler, then the afterlife of one person was imagined as requiring the deaths of many others. That possibility casts a long shadow over royal glory. It suggests that service did not end at the grave. It crossed the threshold with the master. The underworld becomes social hierarchy continued underground. This is not a comfortable thought. You may prefer an afterlife where every soul stands alone before truth, stripped of rank. But the royal graves of whisper something older and more tangled. They suggest that powerful communities tried to send rank, retinue, wealth, and music below together. Death was universal, yes, but burial could still proclaim inequality with impressive determination. The pit grows darker as the sun lowers. The objects continue to gleam faintly. A gold cup, a gaming board, a weapon, a headdress, a lyre, a body at the foot of another body. Each item asks whether the soul was believed to need tools, pleasure, protection, entertainment, or witnesses in the dark. No single answer holds everything. The cemetery remains both evidence and riddle. It shows care, status, violence, artistry, belief, and fear arranged in soil. It does not give you a doctrine. It gives you a scene so vivid that interpretation feels almost intrusive. You step back from the edge. The city of rises in imagination behind you, with its temple platform catching evening light. Beneath that living city, the royal dead lie in constructed splendour, not floating beyond the stars, but resting within the earth's memory. Their souls, shades, or names were not sent empty-handed. They were surrounded by things that once shone, sounded, served, and signified power. And in the hush of the tomb, where music has been silent for 4,000 years, you sense the ancient hope that rank, beauty, and command might survive the descent, even if breath could not. A house grows quiet after sunset, and the dead become easier to imagine, not because they suddenly enter, perhaps, but because the living finally stop making so much noise. The grinding stone rests, the cooking pot cools, the courtyard shadows lengthen into one another. Children are pulled indoors reluctantly, with the ancient dignity of small people being denied one more game. A lamp is lit near the wall. Its flame trembles, soft and yellow. You step into an ordinary home, not a palace, not a temple, not a royal tomb filled with glittering proof of power. This is a house of work, sleep, meals, worries, family quarrels, and repaired vessels. Its walls are made of mud brick, plastered and patched. Its roof is supported by reeds and beams. Its rooms hold baskets, jars, tools, mats, bowls, and the smell of smoke that never quite leaves. Somewhere within such a house, the dead may still have a place. In ancient Mesopotamia, many burials were connected with domestic space, either beneath floors or near family dwellings. Archaeological reports from sites across the region show that death could be woven into the structure of household life. This does not mean every family practiced burial in the same way, or that every grave had the same meaning. It does mean that the boundary between home and tomb could be very thin. You pause near a plastered floor. Beneath it may rest a relative whose bones no longer hold a face, but whose name once moved through the room. A mother may have prepared food above the burial of her own mother. A son may have slept near the place where his father was laid. A new child may have taken first steps over an ancestor hidden in the earth. This closeness is unsettling only if the dead are imagined as pollution or absence. In the Sumerian household, the dead could remain part of a continuing network. They were no longer speaking members of the family. which at least spared them from daily arguments about storage jars. Yet they were not entirely gone. Their presence was managed through ritual, memory, and offerings. The house became layered, living above, dead below, names between. You feel the coolness of the floor through your feet. It is not cold like stone. It is compacted earth, worn by use, swept by hands, marked by the rhythm of work. Near a corner, a small vessel may be placed. It might hold water or food. The gift may be humble, but humility does not make it meaningless. In a household where every measure of grain matters, a small offering still costs something. That cost is the proof. A mainstream historical fact supports this intimate picture. Textual evidence from Mesopotamia refers to regular rites for the dead, including offerings that later sources call by terms connected with funerary care and ancestor observance. While details changed over time, the underlying idea remained strong. The dead required attention, and families bore responsibility for providing it. This practice turns the household into a ritual institution. Not only priests serve the unseen, parents, children, widows, brothers, and sisters do too. You do not need a grand temple courtyard to maintain a bond with the dead. Sometimes a cup of water near a floor is enough to speak the old language. The ghost in this world is not always a monster. Often it is kin. That is important, because modern stories enjoy making ghosts dramatic. They drag chains, slam doors, and generally behave like terrible house guests. Sumerian and Mesopotamian traditions could certainly imagine dangerous spirits. But the household dead also belong to ordinary obligation. A ghost might be feared if neglected, but cared for if recognized. The difference between ancestor and troublemaker could depend on ritual attention. There is a very practical lesson there. Do not ignore relatives completely, even dead ones. A quirky little strand in Mesopotamian ghost lore suggests that spirits could be addressed, appeased, or ritually guided when they disturb the living. Later texts include procedures for identifying and sending away troublesome ghosts. The idea may sound eerie, but it also reveals emotional realism. A household haunted by grief may need action, not only sorrow. Ritual gives shape to distress, which is useful when the heart behaves badly. You picture a family at the evening meal. The father tears bread, the mother pours beer into a cup. A daughter listens to a story she's heard before, pretending she is not. A young boy pokes at lentils with suspicion, because children have always been brave in all matters except dinner. Near the edge of the meal, a portion may be set aside for the one below. The dead are not eating in the usual sense. The living know this, surely. Yet they also believe the act matters. A ritual meal is not ordinary feeding. It is relationship performed through food. It says, you still belong. It says, your place has changed, but your name has not been thrown away. This is social memory made edible. It is also theology in a bowl. Scholars continue to debate whether such domestic offerings were primarily acts of ancestor veneration, attempts to protect the living from restless spirits, or practical expressions of kinship across generations. The most careful answer may be that ancient households did not separate those meanings as sharply as modern categories do. Reverence, fear, love, inheritance, and habit can all sit together at one table. The house smells of barley, onions, smoke, wool, and human closeness. A baby stirs on a mat. An older man clears his throat. Outside, the lane has darkened. A dog noses at a refuse pile above the roof. Stars appear with unnerving calm. The same stars that watch every family believe its grief is unique. Inside, the name is spoken. The name changes the room. To speak the dead person's name is to make the absence specific. Without name, the dead become general, absorbed into the grey multitude below. With a name, they return as this mother, this brother, this child, this old woman who complained about the neighbours and was probably correct. Memory restores texture. It gives the shade a contour. The Sumerian soul, if you call it that, seems tied to this contour. It is not a detached spark, shining alone in a pure heaven. It is embedded in family, house, body, burial, and name. Its welfare is relational. It continues because others continue it. That is both fragile and beautiful. The fragile part is obvious. Families fail, houses burn, cities fall, floods wash graves away, wars scatter descendants, disease empties courtyards. A person may be loved and still become forgotten when the world breaks hard enough. The Sumerians knew instability well. Their cities rose in landscapes where water brought life and danger together. The beautiful part is quieter. It means the living can help. They cannot abolish death, but they can answer it. A daughter pouring water is not powerless. A son remembering a name is not merely sentimental. A widow placing food is not pretending. These gestures keep a thread stretched between breath and shadow. You move toward the doorway. The wooden latch is rough beneath your fingers. Outside, night presses gently against the house. Inside, the lamp flame bends and steadies. The offering bowl remains where it was placed, modest, patient, and oddly dignified. No monument records this act. No royal inscription boasts of it. Yet such acts may have formed the deepest foundation of Sumerian afterlife belief. Not the spectacular tomb, not the divine myth, not the terrifying court below, but the repeated household care that kept the dead from becoming abandoned. The afterlife entered the home through routine, and routine gave it endurance. Perhaps the most ancient truths survive because they are repeated quietly. A bowl filled, a name spoken, a floor swept above the dead. You remain in the warm hush of the house, hearing the breath of sleepers and the faint creak of cooling beams. Beneath the floor, the ancestor rests within the earth's darkness. Above the floor, the family continues its fragile work of living. Between them, the offering waits like a small bridge, built not from stone, but from duty, tenderness, and fear of forgetting. A road leaves the city, and not everyone who takes it returns to be buried. That thought lies quietly beside the canal, where reeds tremble in the night air and insects sing from hidden places. The houses behind you hold their lamps and offering bowls. The graves beneath their floors are known, named, and tended. Yet beyond the walls, the world is less kind. A traveller may vanish, a soldier may fall far from home, a labourer may be swallowed by floodwater. In the Sumerian imagination, such deaths carried a special unease. The dead needed placement, memory, and offerings. But life did not always arrange itself politely around ritual needs. Bodies could be lost, families could be destroyed, names could fail. A person might descend into the lower realm without proper burial, without descendants, without anyone pouring water or speaking their name. That possibility is more frightening than darkness itself. You walk along the outer road, where the city's sounds fade behind you. The ground is rough with dry grass and hard earth. A faint smell of marsh water moves through the reeds, far away. A dog barks, then another answers. Above you, the sky's crowded with stars, brilliant and indifferent. They have no obligation to remember anyone. The forgotten dead occupy a troubling place in Mesopotamian thought. Texts and later traditions suggest that those without proper rites could become restless, hungry, or dangerous. A ghost deprived of burial or offerings might wander at the edges of the living world. It might appear in dreams, trouble households, or seek attention through illness and fear. That is not just a ghost story. It is a social warning. Ancient Mesopotamian society depended on bonds of kinship, household, and ritual continuity. When those bonds failed, death became disorder. A person without a grave was not simply unfortunate. The person was unplaced. The shade lacked the settled condition expected for the dead, and the living lacked the comfort of completed duty. In that gap, anxiety grew, You imagine a body lying where no family can reach it. The sun dries the ground, wind lifts dust across the face, no mourner washes it, no vessel is placed nearby, no name is called over the burial. The person becomes an absence without ceremony, and that absence presses against the imagination of the living. It is a lonely image. The Sumerians knew the violence of rivers, war, disease, labour accidents and travel. Cities could flourish, but the plain around them was not gentle. A canal could nourish fields, then collapse and drown workers. A campaign could take men far from their households. A fever could empty rooms faster than ritual could respond. Ancient life was intimate with interruption. A mainstream historical fact supports this anxiety. Mesopotamian texts from different periods preserve rituals and incantations meant to address ghosts who were not properly settled. These traditions suggest that the dead could become a source of disturbance when funerary order had broken down. The belief was not only about fear of spirits, it was about fear of failed transition. A ghost without care is unfinished. It remains between categories. The living seem to have feared such in between things. A sealed jar is safe because it is sealed. A gate is safe because someone guards it. A corpse is safe when buried correctly. A name is safe when remembered properly. But a body left exposed, a spirit left unfed, a death left unnamed. These disturb the structure of the world. A quirky belief from later Mesopotamian ghost lore gives certain spirits rather specific complaints. Some are imagined as lacking anyone to make offerings. Some are associated with violent death, improper burial, or forgotten status. It can sound almost like an ancient customer service department for the supernatural, except the customers are dead, hungry, and not leaving a polite review. Still, the humour fades quickly. Each complaint represents a wound in the social fabric. The restless dead are not random horrors. They are reminders that a human being has not been properly received by either world. The living world has lost them, but the underworld has not settled them comfortably. Their condition becomes a question with no answer. You hear the wind move through dry reeds. It sounds like whispering. Although reeds are innocent of meaning, people have always heard voices where grief is nearby. A rustle becomes a sign. A dream becomes a message. A sudden illness becomes accusation. The forgotten dead survive not only below, but inside the fears of those who imagine abandonment. Scholars continue to debate how far ghost rituals reflect popular belief rather than learned ritual tradition. Some view them as evidence of widespread concern over unsettled spirits. Others caution that many surviving texts come from trained ritual experts, whose work may formalize fears in specialized ways. A balanced reading sees both the expert and the household behind the words. Formal rituals often grow from ordinary dread. The lonely dead do not need elegance. They need recognition. That recognition might come through burial, naming, substitute rites, or offerings made to soothe a spirit whose proper care was interrupted. The exact practice could vary, but the emotional logic remains clear. Disorder must be answered with ritual. A death without form must be given form. The wandering presence must be addressed, guided, fed, or dismissed. The soul, in this darker aspect, becomes vulnerable to neglect. It is not imagined as completely self-sufficient. It does not automatically rise beyond harm. It may depend on others, and others may fail. This makes the Sumerian afterlife painfully social. Your condition after death is tied to people who may love you, forget you, fear you, or never know what happened. That's a hard doctrine to sleep beside. Yet it is honest about human life. No person lives alone, and no person is remembered alone. Even identity requires witnesses. A name without a speaker becomes faint. A grave without visitors becomes a hollow in the earth. A life without record may still have mattered deeply, but history may never learn how. The forgotten dead stand for all those whose stories slipped away before clay could hold them. You pause by a small mound outside the city. It may be a grave, or only a shape made by wind. The uncertainty is the point. Not every ancient burial announces itself. Not every soul receives a marker. Not every mourner leaves evidence. Archaeology is full of absences that once were people. The night seems wider here. The city behind you offers order, but the road offers loss. Between them lies the fear that the dead might not find their place. In Sumerian thought, improper burial could unsettle more than the spirit. It could unsettle the living, because the boundary between worlds had not been sealed. You think of the worker who dies far from family, the prisoner unnamed, the infant never entered into memory, the widow whose children are gone, the migrant whose bones rest under unfamiliar soil. The old texts do not solve their sorrow. They preserve the fear. They make a place for the question, even if they cannot heal it. Perhaps the restless dead are history's most honest ghosts. They ask who remembers the unremembered. They ask who feeds the unfed. They ask what becomes of a soul when no living mouth carries its name. The reeds move again. The stars remain silent. In the distance, the city lamps burn like small promises made against the dark. Within those walls, families tend their known dead. Beyond them, the forgotten wander at the edges of thought, hungry not only for bread and water, but for the simple human mercy of being placed somewhere in memory. A threshold appears where the earth seems to remember footsteps. It is not a doorway built for the living, though your mind tries to make it familiar. You imagine posts, a lintel, a bar, a watchful attendant. Yet the road ahead does not belong to any ordinary house. It belongs to the hidden geography of death, where rivers, gates, porters, and passages shape the journey of the shade. The Sumerian dead do not merely dissolve. They travel. That travel is difficult to map, because the tablets speak in glimpses rather than in full directions. No ancient scribe provides a helpful little drawing with arrows and labels, which is inconsiderate of them after 5,000 years. Instead, you receive fragments of underworld roads, guarded entrances, divine messengers, and stern keepers of boundaries. You stand at one such boundary in imagination. The ground slopes downward. The air grows cooler against your face. Behind you are fields, rooftops, animals, markets, and the constant human talent for making noise. Ahead is a passage where sound becomes narrow. A faint mineral smell rises from below, mixed with the memory of river mud. The first guardian waits. A gate is never just wood or metal in the ancient imagination. It is a decision made solid. It marks where one condition ends and another begins. In Mesopotamian cities, gates controlled movement, trade, defense, ceremony, and law. In mythic geography, gates do the same for souls. They regulate passage between the visible world and the great below. A mainstream historical fact helps anchor this vision. Sumerian and later Mesopotamian texts often describe the underworld as an organized place entered through controlled thresholds. In tales of divine descent and ghostly return, gatekeepers and messengers appear as essential figures. This shows that death was imagined not as aimless falling, but as passage through a managed boundary. The soul does not simply slip in unnoticed. Someone receives it. That someone may be a porter, a gatekeeper, or an official of the realm below. Such figures are easy to overlook beside gods and queens, but they matter deeply. A gatekeeper is the face of a system. He does not need to be famous. He needs to know when to open, when to close, and whom to admit. You can almost see him by the dim entrance. His clothing is plain. His expression is patient. He has heard every excuse. The rich arrive with memories of privilege. The poor arrive with memories of hunger. The brave arrive surprised. The beautiful arrive dimmed. All must wait before the gate. No one enjoys a line, especially a final one. In some underworld narratives, the gatekeeper's role is precise and ritualized. He asks questions. He reports to higher authority. He opens according to command. His work confirms that the lower realm has procedure. Even crossing into death involves recognition by others, not private imagination alone. Beyond the gate, the road may pass through darkness, but water is never far from thought. Mesopotamia was a land shaped by rivers, canals, marshes, and floods. It is natural that paths to the dead might be imagined with waters, crossings, or fluid boundaries. Although the Sumerian evidence is not always as explicit as later traditions, the wider Mesopotamian world often connects death with difficult passage and underworld routes that require guidance. You hear water moving somewhere unseen. It may be a river below the earth. It may be memory borrowing the sound of canals. Water is life in the upper world, but at a boundary it becomes more mysterious. Rivers divide fields, canals divide districts, marsh channels mislead travellers, floods erase roads. To cross water is to depend on skill, timing, and permission. For a shade, a river may represent the impossibility of returning by ordinary strength. A living person can step back from a ford. The dead cannot. You move along the imagined path, where the walls seem damp, though no rain has ever touched them. There are marks in the clay, perhaps from countless unseen feet. The road is not crowded in a noisy way. It is crowded in a deeper sense, filled with all who have passed without leaving visible trace. Every human road above eventually feeds this hidden road below. The Sumerian world was full of messengers. Kings sent envoys, temples sent orders, gods sent commands through dreams, omens, and divine agents. It makes sense that death also had intermediaries. The dead could not simply negotiate with ultimate powers on equal terms. They entered a chain of officials, attendants, and watchers. This is bureaucracy made sacred, or terrifying, perhaps both. A quirky fringe tidbit clings to the idea of underworld gates. Some modern enthusiasts imagine ancient Mesopotamian gateways as literal portals left by forgotten beings, hidden machines disguised as myth. It is an entertaining thought for a rainy afternoon, but the more persuasive mystery is human and symbolic. Ancient people knew that every important change needs a threshold. Birth has one, marriage has one, kingship has one, death has the last. The last threshold must be guarded carefully. Scholars continue to debate how coherent the underworld's imagined geography was across Sumerian texts. Some argue that repeated features, such as gates, roads, and officials, suggest a stable conceptual map. Others warn that mythic spaces can shift from story to story, shaped by ritual need, poetic purpose, and local tradition. The debate matters because the underworld may be less like a fixed city plan and more like a sacred pattern with recurring features. A pattern can guide without becoming a map. You do not need exact coordinates to feel the descent. The soul's journey, then, may be understood as a sequence of transformations. It leaves the body. It is mourned by the household. It passes beyond familiar space. It approaches guarded boundaries. It is admitted into a realm whose laws are not human laws. At each point, the person is less available to the living, yet not entirely disconnected from them. That is the strange tension. The road closes behind the dead, but offerings and names continue to move in their direction. The gate admits the shade, but memory still knocks from above. The porter may control entry, yet the living keep sending small messages through ritual care. The boundary is firm. It is not silent. You imagine a funeral procession stopping at the edge of a grave. The mourners do not see a cosmic gate, but their actions create one. The luring of the body, the words spoken, the placement of objects, the filling of soil, each gesture marks a crossing. The grave becomes a local entrance to the unseen geography. The household knows the place. The underworld knows the arrival. Perhaps every burial is a gate in miniature. The soul travels through space that myth makes visible and ritual makes practical. The living do not need to know the full road. They need to perform the threshold correctly. They must bring the body to its proper place, speak the right words, and recognize that a human being has changed worlds. Your hand reaches toward the imagined gate. The surface feels cold, not with metal, but with the absence of sun. The keeper watches, neither cruel nor kind. Behind him lies the road no living traveller should complete. You understand now why porters and guardians matter so much. They protect the order of separation. Without them, the dead might roam. Without them, the living might intrude. Without them, the world would leak. The Sumerian imagination is careful with such borders. It allows contact, but not confusion. A ghost may appear, a goddess may descend, a ritual may send food below. Yet these are exceptional passages, shaped by rule. The basic order remains. The living remain above, the dead continue beneath, and gates hold the distinction. The unseen river murmurs again. The hound is low and patient. It does not hurry the traveller, because it has received travellers since the first graves were dug in the plain. Beyond the gate, the path disappears into a dimness that feels less like emptiness than possession. The underworld owns its roads. You stand at the threshold, sensing how the Sumerian soul is carried not by wings, but by passage. It does not rise in triumph. It moves through guarded depth, along routes imagined from city gates, canals, courts, and sealed doors. The geography of death is built from the architecture of life, and there, at the border, the porter waits with calm hands, while the road bends downward and the last familiar sounds of the living world fade into clay. A name is pressed into clay, and for a moment a person resists the enormous hunger of time. The reed stylus moves with small confidence, cutting wedges into a damp tablet. The scribe does not look heroic. He leans forward, perhaps tired, perhaps bored, perhaps thinking more about supper than eternity. Yet his hand performs a kind of quiet magic. He makes sound visible, he gives memory a body. In the Sumerian world, names were not casual labels drifting above life. A name could hold identity, reputation, lineage, office, and relationship. To know a name was to locate someone within the human and divine order. To speak it was to call that person into attention. To write it was to give the name a chance of outlasting the mouth that formed it. You stand in a small scribal room, where clay tablets dry on shelves and students practice signs under watchful eyes. The scent is earthy, mixed with reed fibre and sweat, and a faint trace of smoke from a nearby lamp. Outside, the city moves through heat and business, but here time feels measured in lines and impressions. Mistakes can be smoothed away while the clay is wet. Later, they harden. That is both practical and unsettling. A mainstream historical fact supports this idea of written endurance. Sumerian scribes created some of the earliest known systems of writing, and their tablets preserve names of rulers, officials, workers, deities, scribes, and ordinary people involved in economic records. Many individuals who would otherwise have vanished entirely survive because a clay document once needed to identify them. Immortality sometimes begins with accounting. It is not romantic, but it works. A worker receives barley. A woman is listed in a ration tablet. A temple servant appears in an allocation. A king's name is carved into a building inscription. A god's name is repeated in hymns. Each written name enters a different layer of memory, from the humble to the magnificent. The tablet does not care whether the person was beloved. It records because recording is required. Yet from the view of the dead, even a dry administrative note can become a miracle. A name surviving for thousands of years means that someone's outline has not completely disappeared. The body is gone. The house is gone. The language itself had to be recovered by modern scholars. Still, the name remains, waiting in clay like a seed that refuses to rot. You imagine a curator reading such a name aloud. The sound may be uncertain, reconstructed through scholarship, shaped by signs whose pronunciations are debated. Even so, the attempt matters. A person buried in silence is briefly returned to speech. The museum room becomes a narrow bridge between ancient breath and modern lips. This is not resurrection. It is recognition. The Sumerian concern with names reaches into royal inscriptions and religious texts. Kings boasted that they built temples so their names would endure. They asked gods to remember them. They feared erasure. Behind the grandeur lies a familiar human anxiety. You may rule a city, command labour, raise platforms, and dedicate statues, yet still tremble before the possibility that one day nobody will say who you were. Honestly, kings can be very dramatic about being forgotten, but perhaps they are only louder than the rest of us. In the afterlife, remembrance may shape the condition of the shade. Offerings require identification. Ritual care requires a known recipient. A name directs attention, like a bowl placed in the right hands. Without a name, the dead risk dissolving into the general multitude below. They become one of many, present but indistinct, like a face seen through dust. A small household rite may have carried a name gently across the boundary. The living voice would say the dead person's name while pouring water or setting food aside. The gesture acknowledged continuity. The person was no longer visible, but the name made them addressable. In a world where the dead could need care, being addressable was not a minor matter. You feel the power of that. A name gathers scattered memory into one point. It holds gestures, habits, failures, kindnesses, annoyances, and the particular shape of a life. Without it, grief becomes fog. With it, grief can kneel somewhere. A quirky detail emerges from scribal culture. Some ancient tablets preserve colophons, ownership marks, or school exercises that reveal the pride and personality of those who copied them. A scribe might identify himself, his teacher, or the tablet series. It is a small human tug at permanence. Even the person copying old words wants to leave a trace. One can almost hear him thinking, yes, the gods are important, but please note that I wrote this rather nicely. The desire to be named is stubborn. It survives humility poorly. Scholars continue to debate the relationship between written memory and actual funerary belief. Some emphasize that writing belonged largely to institutions, not to every household equally. Others argue that the broader culture of naming, commemoration, and inscription shaped how people imagined survival after death. The tension is important. Most Sumerians did not receive grand inscriptions. Yet their society understood that names could endure through formal preservation. The written name and the spoken name may have worked differently, but both fought oblivion. One lived on clay, one lived in mouths. A name inscribed on a statue could ask future viewers to speak it. A building inscription could plead with later kings not to erase it. A funerary ritual could call upon the dead by name. These acts reveal a common fear beneath different settings. Forgetting harms, erasure threatens, memory sustains. You walk through a temple courtyard where statues once stood with clasped hands and wide eyes. Some bore inscriptions naming the devotee who dedicated them. The statue could remain before the god, praying in the person's place. Its stone or gypsum body stood where flesh could not always remain. The name on it anchored identity within sacred space. That image touches the afterlife gently. A person cannot be everywhere. A body dies. A voice ends. But a named object can continue attending. A tablet can continue speaking. A statue can continue facing the divine with its permanent gaze. Ancient people understood substitute presence with remarkable depth. The soul, therefore, is not only below, it is also distributed through memory, name, object, and ritual. Part of the person descends into darkness. Part remains in the house. Part may rest in a written sign. Part lives in the responsibilities of descendants. The self is not a single sealed container. It is a pattern held by others. Perhaps that is why erasure was so feared. To destroy a name was to attack the person's survival in social and sacred memory. Later rulers sometimes defaced inscriptions of enemies. The act was political, but also almost metaphysical. It said, "You will not be remembered correctly. You will not stand where you placed yourself in time." A chisel against a name can sound like a second death. You see the clay tablet again, drying slowly near the scribe's hand. The marks are small. They do not know they are ancient yet. They do not know they will survive collapsed walls, buried rooms, floods of history, foreign languages, lost gods, and the long sleep of ruins. They simply harden. So much depends on hardening. Clay remembers because it changes state. A spoken name vanishes into air unless another mouth catches it. A written name becomes object. It can be buried, broken, burned, lost, found, catalogued, and read again. It passes through disaster with a durability flesh never receives. The room grows still. The scribe lifts his stylus. Outside, a family may be preparing a meal for the living and portion for someone gone. In a palace, a king may be planning a monument. In a temple, a hymn may be sung to a god whose name must not be neglected. Everywhere, names move like small flames against vast dark. You understand now why the Sumerian dead needed more than a grave. They needed identification within memory. A shade without offering suffers. A body without burial is unsettled. A name without speakers fades. The soul's fate is therefore bound to language itself. A final sign is pressed into the tablet. The edge of the reed leaves its wedge, sharp and deliberate. The name is complete for now, held in wet clay, breathing in the only way clay can breathe. Somewhere beyond the city, death waits beneath the earth. Somewhere within the city, memory prepares its answer. And perhaps, in that answer, a name continues to breathe long after the chest that carried it has fallen silent. The question of death widens until it becomes a question about creation. You stand not in a grave, not beside a household bowl, but at the edge of an older beginning, where gods work before humans fully understand why they exist. The air feels different here. It is less like a city evening and more like a memory from before cities, when clay, water, breath, and divine need are still being shaped into meaning. In Sumerian thought, humanity does not appear as an accident without purpose. People are made within a divine economy, a system of labour, service, nourishment, worship, and order. The gods require the world to function. Fields must be tended, temples must be supplied, offerings must be prepared, songs must be sung. Someone must do the heavy work of keeping creation in motion. Naturally, that someone is humanity, very generous of the gods. You feel the old story gathering around you like warm mud between your fingers. Divine beings shape humans from clay, the material of riverbanks, bricks, tablets, vessels, and graves. Clay is humble, but it is also miraculous. It can be pressed into signs. It can be formed into walls. It can hold water. It can seal jars. It can receive the dead. It can be moulded into a creature who asks why it must die. A mainstream historical fact gives this vision its grounding. Mesopotamian creation traditions often present human beings as created to relieve the gods of labour and to maintain the divine household through offerings and service. The exact myths differ across Sumerian and later Akkadian literature, but the pattern remains powerful. Humanity exists within a relationship of obligation to divine powers. That idea changes the soul's fate. If humans are created for service, then death does not simply end a private journey. It marks the completion, interruption, or transformation of a role within the sacred system. Life is labour under the sky. Death is relocation beneath the earth. Both conditions belong to the order shaped by the gods. You walk across the imagined plain at dawn. The ground is wet near the river, dark and shining with silt. Men and women move toward fields with baskets, tools, and tired bodies. Smoke rises from ovens. A temple platform glows in the first light. Priests prepare offerings. Workers carry grain. Scribes count. Children trail behind adults, already learning that life is made of tasks. The world smells of mud, bread, sweat, and fresh reeds. Nothing here is abstract. If the gods made humans to sustain divine order, then every meal given to a god, every field cleared, every canal dug, and every hymn sung becomes part of cosmic maintenance. The human body is a working instrument. The human voice is a ritual tool. The human name is an entry in the ongoing account of creation. This can sound harsh, yet it also gives human life a place within the universe. You are not meaningless dust in Sumerian imagination. You are useful dust. That may not be flattering, but it is something. The gods did not create humans merely to admire them from a respectful distance. They created a species with duties. The soul at death carries the memory of those duties. A person who served household, temple, field, family, and city does not vanish into philosophical air. The shade descends as a being formed by work and obligation. Its continued care depends on the same principle that governed life. Relationships must be maintained through giving and receiving. Humans serve gods. Descendants serve ancestors. The pattern repeats downward. You sense a hidden symmetry. The gods once needed humans to provide offerings. The dead later need the living to provide offerings. In both cases, unseen beings depend on visible human action. The temple and the tomb are not identical, but they rhyme. Each asks the living to feed someone beyond ordinary reach. That rhyme may explain why funerary care felt so natural within Mesopotamian religion. If the world itself is held together by offerings, then the dead also belong to that economy. A bowl placed for an ancestor is not strange beside a sacrifice made at a temple. Both are gestures across a boundary. Both say that relationship continues through provision. A quirky modern misconception imagines ancient people as constantly terrified of their gods, walking around in permanent panic beneath storm clouds of divine supervision. They certainly feared the gods, and with reason. Yet their rituals also show routine, negotiation, devotion, habit, hope, and the occasional practical attitude of people who know the gods must be fed on schedule. Religion was not only awe, it was also logistics with incense. The gods needed their portions. The dead needed theirs too. Scholars continue to debate how directly creation myths shaped ordinary funerary practice. Some argue that temple theology and household religion operated at different levels, with myths expressing elite theological ideas rather than everyday assumptions. Others see deep connections between cosmic service, ancestral duty, and the organization of Mesopotamian society. The discussion remains open, because surviving texts are mostly literate and institutional, while many rituals lived in hands, voices, and rooms. Still, the pattern is difficult to ignore. Creation gives humanity a role. Life performs that role through labor and offering. Death transfers the human being into a dependent state. The living then imitate the old divine relationship by sustaining those who no longer labor above ground. The servant becomes the one served. There is melancholy in that reversal. A person may spend decades grinding grain, digging canals, weaving cloth, bearing children, carrying jars, appeasing officials, paying debts, and praising gods. Then the hands stop, the mouth stops, the body enters earth. Suddenly that once working person depends on others to pour water and remember. It is humbling. It is also strangely fair. No one remains only giver forever. The child once fed by parents may later feed them as ancestors. The worker who served gods may later be served by descendants. Time turns all hands over. The one who pours today will one day need someone to pour. You step into a mythic workshop where clay is being shaped. The scene is not clean. Creation is wet, tactile, and earthy. Divine hands press forms into being. Water glistens. Mud clings. The first human body is not imagined as marble or light, but as shaped earth. That matters deeply, because the end of the body returns to the same substance. Clay at birth, clay at burial, clay on the tablet that preserves the name. The cycle is so elegant that it feels almost intentional. Human beings arise from the material of civilization itself. Their houses are clay, their records are clay, their jars are clay, their graves are clay, their myths are preserved in clay. Even their bodies are imagined through clay. The substance that makes them also remembers them. Perhaps this is why Sumerian death thought feels so grounded. It does not hurry the soul away from matter. It keeps the person tied to earth, household, food, water, and inscription. Even the surviving shade is surrounded by material concerns. It needs offerings. It has a place. It belongs to a realm beneath. The upper world, with its canals and temples, is not separate from the lower world. They form one vertical system. Gods above and below, humans in between, ancestors underneath, offerings moving across boundaries. Life becomes a corridor of obligations, with each being sustaining another, knowingly or not. Your mind drifts toward the temple kitchen. Bread is baked for gods. Beer is prepared. Animals are brought. Oil is measured. Scribes record what enters and leaves. The scene is busy, almost domestic. Divine service looks remarkably like household management on a cosmic scale. Then your mind turns to the small funerary vessel. A family pours water for a dead relative. No royal hymn is sung. No grand account is written. Yet the gesture belongs to the same universe. Someone unseen is cared for. A relationship is kept alive by giving. In this sense, the soul at death remains inside the original reason for humanity's creation. It does not become independent of the system. It joins another level of it. The dead no longer feed the gods through temple labour, but they enter the chain of beings who require human attention. They become recipients of the care they once helped provide. The thought is slightly unsettling. It suggests that human existence is never completely self-owned. From creation to death, the person belongs to networks of divine demand. Family memory, social duty, and material exchange. Even the shade below is not free in the modern sense, it continues within relationship. Yet perhaps complete freedom was never the Sumerian dream. Order was, continuation was. A place in the system was. The dawn brightens over the fields. Workers bend to their tasks. The temple smoke rises. Somewhere, a child asks why offerings must be made, and an elder gives an answer that is probably too long. The gods made humans to serve. The elder might say, the dead need the living. The world continues because everyone receives and gives in turn. You hold that answer gently, not as final truth, but as an ancient structure of meaning. The soul at death descends, but it does not fall out of creation. It remains within the great arrangement that began when clay first became human under divine intention, and as the sun spreads across the plain, the shaped earth walks, works, prays, loves, and remembers, never entirely separate from the darker earth waiting patiently below. Water rises in the old stories, and the world begins to lose its edges. At first, it is only rain, perhaps, or river swell, or the uneasy sound of canals speaking too loudly in the dark. Then fields vanish, roads soften, courtyards fill, the marks of human order blur under a moving surface, and the plain that once fed the cities becomes a single restless body. You stand where the flood memory begins. The air is heavy with wet clay and frightened animals. Reeds bend flat beneath wind. A family gathers jars, grain, tools, and children with the confused urgency of those who still hope tomorrow will be ordinary. Temple steps glisten. Roofs drip. The river, giver of harvests, has become too generous, which is exactly the kind of joke no farmer appreciates. In Sumerian tradition, flood stories preserve one of the great meditations on mortality. The tale of Ziusudra, the pious king warned of destruction, belongs among the oldest known flood narratives from Mesopotamia. Later, Akkadian and Babylonian versions developed the theme through figures such as Utnapishtim, whose survival becomes tied to the painful question of why humans cannot live forever. That question sits at the centre of the flood, not merely who survives, why survival does not become immortality for all. The flood narrative is not only a disaster story, as it is a boundary story. Water erases human arrangements, but it also reveals divine limits placed upon humanity. The gods may regret, decide, warn, destroy, preserve, and decree. Humans may build, obey, fear, endure, and mourn. Yet they do not control the final shape of existence. You imagine a boat sealed against the waters. The smell inside is sharp and crowded. Wet rope, stored grain, animal breath, human sweat. A lamp flame trembles and smokes. Outside, rain or flood water beats against the vessel with mindless patience. Inside, people wait, listening to the world end beyond wood and bitumen. The flood is a return to unmaking. Land disappears into water, just as the named person can disappear into the mass of the dead. Boundaries fail. City becomes marsh. Field becomes river. House becomes debris. A life without boundary becomes terror, because meaning often depends on separation. This is field. This is canal. This is house. This is grave. This is the living. This is the dead. Water ignores the labels. It simply enters. A mainstream historical fact anchors the story in real Mesopotamian experience. Southern Mesopotamia depended on rivers and canals, and flooding was both life-giving and dangerous. Archaeologists have found flood deposits at several ancient sites, though no single layer can simply be equated with one universal flood myth. The environment itself taught people that water could create abundance and erase settlement with the same calm movement. That environmental truth became mythic truth. The flood showed that human civilization was fragile, however loud its kings became. Bricks melted, grain spoiled, animals drowned, names vanished. The gods remained beyond the waters, but humans were forced to count their losses from inside them. A quirky fringe idea often attaches itself to ancient flood traditions. Some people treat every flood myth as secret proof of one lost, global, super-civilization with perfect maps, shining machines, and apparently terrible drainage planning. It is an entertaining thought, but the older and more persuasive reality is simpler. River societies remember floods because floods remember them back, sometimes with brutal efficiency. The Mesopotamian flood also speaks to the soul at death through contrast. One survivor may be granted exceptional status, removed from ordinary human fate, but this special gift only emphasizes that the rest of humanity remains mortal. The exception proves the boundary. Eternal life is not humanity's natural inheritance. It belongs elsewhere, guarded by divine decision. That is the bitter teaching Gilgamesh later confronts in the wider Mesopotamian tradition. A human may be strong, wise, beloved, and desperate, yet still lose the plant of renewal, still fail to bring back lasting life, still return to the city with empty hands. Mortality remains the condition of human beings, not because they are always foolish, but because the gods have drawn the line. You feel that line like wet cord against the palm. It tightens quietly. The soul descends because human life is limited. That seems obvious, almost too obvious to say. Yet ancient myth makes it cosmic. Death is not merely a biological event. It is part of the arrangement after creation, flood, decree, and divine decision. Humanity survives as a species, but each person remains temporary. Civilization continues, but individual breath passes away. The flood memory deepens this understanding. When waters withdraw, survivors step into a changed world. Mud covers everything. Bodies may be missing. Fields must be reclaimed. The smell is sour, raw, and new. The first fire after disaster must have seemed sacred. The first loaf of bread must have felt like civilization returning in edible form. Yet the dead remain dead. The survivor's task is not to undo the flood. It is to rebuild around absence. This resembles mourning. Grief floods the inner world, erasing familiar paths. Then, slowly, one learns where to place the furniture of life again. A cup here, a name there, an offering in the proper place. Not because loss is solved, but because life requires new boundaries after water has passed. Scholars continue to debate how Sumerian flood traditions relate to later biblical, Akkadian, and regional versions. Some focus on shared motifs, such as divine warning, a chosen survivor, a vessel, animals, sacrifice, and a new decree. Others emphasize differences in theology, literary setting, and moral emphasis. The debate remains fruitful because flood stories travel, change, and gather meaning as cultures retell them. The old Sumerian memory does not need to be identical to every later version. Its power lies in its own stark concern. Humans live under divine limitation. Flood can nearly erase them. Survival depends on warning, obedience, craft, and favour. Immortality remains rare, strange, and not given to ordinary descendants. You stand on drying ground as the waters recede. The mud grips your feet. Broken reeds lie in heaps. A clay wall is slumped into a shapeless mound. Somewhere, a vessel floats against a collapsed doorway. Birds return before people are ready for birdsong, and they behave as though the world is simply wet, not wounded. That is nature's quiet discourtesy. Life resumes without asking permission from grief. Perhaps this is why the flood story belongs beside the underworld teachings. Both describe a world where human beings cannot keep what they love by force. The city cannot command the river forever. The body cannot command breath forever. The soul cannot command return from the lower realm. The gods may preserve a remnant, but they do not abolish mortality. And yet, rebuilding begins. That matters too. After flood, people repair walls, clear silt, plant fields, restore temples, count survivors, and tell stories. After death, families bury, pour offerings, speak names, and continue meals beside absence. The pattern is similar. Disaster does not end duty. It makes duty more necessary. You turn toward the imagined survivor, standing beneath a clearing sky. He has seen the world reduced to water. He has been spared, but not spared from memory. The gift of survival carries the burden of witness. He knows, more than anyone, that human life rests on permission, not possession. The soul's fate grows clearer in this watery light. Humans were not created as deathless beings. Their life is precious because it is bounded. Their afterlife is shadowed because immortality belongs to another order. The dead continue, but not as triumphant masters of eternity. They continue as shades within a world shaped by divine decrees, family duties, and fragile remembrance. The mud dries slowly. The river lowers. Smoke rises again from hearths that survived or were rebuilt. Someone presses a new wall from fresh clay. Someone counts the missing. Someone speaks a name and discovers that the name hurts. Above, the sky becomes blue with almost offensive beauty. Below, the dead enter their hidden places. Between flood and grave, humanity keeps working, not because it has defeated mortality, but because work, memory, and ritual are the ways mortals answer limits they cannot remove. And perhaps that is the quiet truth carried by the old waters. Eternal life may be withheld, but meaning still returns, slowly, like dry land emerging from the flood. A border is crossed in silence, and the old Sumerian shadows begin to change their clothing. The city names shift, the languages change, new kings rise, new scribes learn older signs, and later peoples inherit stories already worn smooth by repetition. Yet beneath the fresh names and altered prayers, the same question remains close to the skin. Where does the dead person go? You stand in a wide plain of echoes, where Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, Assyrian, Egyptian, and neighbouring voices seem to speak from different rooms of the same ancient house. None says exactly the same thing. None gives a simple answer. Still, each culture listens toward death and imagines a path, a place, a judgment, a hunger, a memory, or a transformation waiting beyond the final breath. The Sumerian vision is among the oldest preserved in writing, but it did not remain sealed inside one language. Later Mesopotamian traditions reshaped underworld ideas through Akkadian literature, royal inscriptions, ritual texts, and epic poetry. Names changed, emphasis shifted. Some images grew darker, others more elaborate. Yet the great below remained a destination of weight, order, and unease. This is how traditions survive. They do not freeze. They travel. A mainstream historical fact can steady the scene. The Sumerian language gradually ceased to be spoken in daily life, but it remained a learned and sacred language in scribal education for centuries. Later Mesopotamian scribes copied Sumerian compositions, translated them, adapted them, and preserved them within schools and temples. In that way, Sumerian death imagery continued to breathe through cultures that no longer spoke Sumerian at home. You imagine a young Akkadian-speaking student seated before a teacher, copying lines from an older Sumerian text. The room smells of wet clay and lamp smoke. The student knows the signs, perhaps imperfectly, and repeats phrases about gods, kings, lamentation, and the world below. He's not Sumerian in the oldest sense, yet the dead of Sumer pass through his hand. That is cultural afterlife. A tradition becomes a ghost that teaches. In later Mesopotamian literature, the underworld often appears as a dark house where inhabitants are deprived of light and ordinary food. The imagery recalls Sumerian patterns, though the language and setting may differ. In the Akkadian version of the Descent of Ishtar, the goddess passes through gates and loses ornaments, echoing the older descent of Inanna. The story changes its voice, but the downward movement remains. A gate opens, a garment is removed, power bows before death. You sense how a myth can migrate while keeping its bones. Ishtar is not simply Inanna with another label, because cultures reinterpret divinity through their own histories and needs. Still, the resemblance matters. It shows that the vision of descent, stripping, and submission to underworld law continued to fascinate later Mesopotamians. Death remained the realm where even brightness had to dim. Then, beyond Mesopotamia, other ancient cultures offered different answers. Egypt, for example, imagined the dead navigating a richly described afterlife, with judgment, spells, divine encounters, preserved bodies, and the hope of blessed existence. The contrast is striking. Egyptian funerary tradition often invested enormous energy in helping the dead move successfully into a transformed state. Mesopotamian thought, by comparison, can feel more restrained, more shadowed, and less optimistic. One world gives the dead guidebooks, another gives them dust and rules. Of course, that contrast can be overstated. Egyptian beliefs varied across time and class. Mesopotamian beliefs were not all despair. Both traditions cared deeply about burial, naming, offerings, and ritual knowledge. Both understood that the dead needed help from the living. Both linked memory with survival. The difference lies partly in mood, and mood matters when you are dealing with eternity. You stand between the Nile and the Euphrates in imagination. On one side, desert light burns around tomb chapels and painted walls. On the other, river mud cools around buried tablets and brick cities. Egypt's dryness preserves bodies and colour with almost theatrical generosity. Mesopotamia's clay preserves words. The dead are held differently by each land. That is not a small thing. Landscape shapes the afterlife. A dry tomb invites thoughts of preservation. A muddy plain invites thoughts of return to earth, offerings, and household continuity. A river that floods with seasonal rhythm may inspire renewal. Rivers that wander, silt, and threaten cities may inspire anxiety about order. People imagine death using the materials that surround them, because even the invisible must be described with visible things. A quirky modern habit tries to blend all ancient afterlives into one grand secret system, as if every myth were a coded manual left by a single, forgotten priesthood with excellent international communication. It sounds tidy, which is precisely why it should be handled carefully. Ancient cultures borrowed, transformed, misunderstood, admired, and resisted one another. They did not simply share one hidden script. Human imagination is more interesting when allowed to be untidy. Scholars continue to debate how much influence moved between Mesopotamia, Egypt, Anatolia, Syria, the Levant, and later Mediterranean traditions. Some emphasize trade, diplomacy, scribal exchange, and shared mythic motifs. Others caution that similar ideas may arise independently when societies face the same human problem of death. A gate to the underworld, for example, does not require direct borrowing. Any house has a door, and every life has an ending. Still, echoes do travel. Stories cross borders with merchants, captives, scribes, brides, soldiers, and singers. A tale told in one city may become altered in another. A goddess may change her name. A ghost may acquire new habits. A ritual may absorb foreign elements while pretending, with charming confidence, that it has always been done that way. The ancient Near East was never silent or isolated. It was a web of movement, tin, silver, cedar, lapis lazuli, textiles, grain, seals, letters, and people travelled across great distances. Along with goods came ideas about kingship, gods, omens, healing, dreams, and the dead. The soul's fate was never only a private matter, it belonged to the circulating imagination of whole regions. You hear the echo in neighbouring traditions. The dead may descend to a shadowed underworld. They may require offerings. They may appear in dreams. They may be judged, named, fed, summoned, feared, or honoured. In some cultures, special dead become powerful ancestors. In others, the dead remain weak unless remembered. Everywhere, the living struggle to keep the boundary stable, because the boundary frightens everyone. Too open, and ghosts trouble the house. Too closed, and grief has nowhere to send its love. This balance appears in many ancient systems. The dead must be gone, but not entirely unreachable. They must have their place, but still receive care. The living must remember, but not collapse into the tomb. Ritual creates a controlled conversation between separation and attachment. The Sumerians shaped one of the earliest written forms of that conversation. Later cultures answered in their own accents. The result is not a single doctrine, but a family of images. Dust below, gates below, judges below, offerings above, names preserved, bodies prepared, waters crossed, stars watched, silence interpreted. You walk now through a museum gallery where objects from many lands share the same subdued light. A Sumerian tablet rests near an Egyptian amulet. A Mesopotamian cylinder seal stands not far from a Levantine figurine. Each object once belonged to a world that thought its own dead were urgent. Behind the glass, they seem calm. That calm is misleading. They are survivors of human dread. The soul at death becomes a mirror for culture. In Sumer, it is a shade tied to earth, offering an underworld order. In Egypt, it may be a composite being requiring preservation, ritual knowledge, and divine acceptance. In later Mesopotamia, it continues through ghosts, laments, royal inscriptions, and underworld journeys. In neighbouring lands, it takes other forms, each shaped by local fear and hope. No answer cancels the others. They gather like lamps in different rooms. Your breathing slows as the echoes soften. The oldest tablets do not stand alone anymore. They belong to a wider human chorus, where every civilization tries to speak across the same darkness. Some speak with confidence, some with grief, some with law, some with magic, some with bread and water placed quietly beside the dead. And through them all the Sumerian shadow remains, not as the only truth, but as one of the earliest preserved whispers. The dead descend, the living remember, and the soul continues somewhere that cannot be reached by sunlight, but can still be touched by name. A tablet room is not dramatic at first glance. It has no thunder, no torchlit altar, no priest raising his hands beneath a sky full of omens. It has shelves, labels, fragments, careful lighting, and people who spend extraordinary amounts of time deciding whether one broken wedge means one word or another. History often survives through such quiet stubbornness. You enter gently, as though the dust might hear you. On the table lies a fragment of clay with only a few lines preserved. One side is broken, a corner has vanished. A sign near the edge is damaged enough to cause trouble, which is exactly what ancient clay seems to enjoy doing to modern scholars. The fragment may mention a god, a ritual, a gate, a ghost, or a place below. The difference matters, but the tablet does not hurry to help. This is where the dead are reconstructed. Not with a shovel alone, with patience. Modern understanding of Sumerian beliefs about death depends on archaeology, philology, comparative religion, and cautious imagination. Excavators recover tablets, graves, vessels, seals, bones, architecture, and offering installations. Language specialists read damaged signs and compare copies from different cities. Historians ask what these traces reveal about belief, practice, social order, and fear. A mainstream historical fact gives weight to this work. Major collections of Mesopotamian tablets are preserved in institutions such as the British Museum, the University of Pennsylvania Museum, Yale Collections, and the Oriental Institute in Chicago. Scholars in these places have helped decipher, edit, translate, and interpret Sumerian and Akkadian texts that would otherwise remain silent lumps of clay. The silence is never complete, though. Clay wants to speak slowly. You watch a researcher lean over a tablet under angled light. The signs become clearer when shadows fall across them. A wedge appears shallow, then suddenly decisive. Another sign has been pressed over a mistake, or perhaps the scribe used an unusual spelling. The scholar frowns. This is not the glamorous expression of discovery. It is the tired expression of someone being personally challenged by a dead bureaucrat. The room smells faintly of paper, clay, cotton, and old cabinets. Outside, the world rushes with bright screens, appointments, and messages. Inside, a person tries to hear a sentence that has been broken since before Rome existed. The scale of that patience is almost devotional, yet reconstruction is not neutral magic. It involves choices. A missing sign may be restored from a parallel text. A damaged phrase may be translated according to one theory of grammar. A divine name may be read differently as new evidence appears. A myth may survive in multiple versions, and no single version may be original in the simple way people want. The soul of Sumer reaches us through scholarly argument. That is strangely appropriate. The Sumerians themselves lived in a world of scribes, copies, lists, teaching, and transmission. Their myths were not fixed forever at one pristine moment. They were taught, copied, adapted, and sometimes misunderstood by later hands. Modern scholars continue that chain, though with better lamps and fewer reed baskets, which is progress of a kind. You look at a photograph of an excavation. Workers stand around a trench. A building outline emerges from soil nearby. Numbered baskets hold objects sorted by context. Archaeology is slow because place matters. A vessel found beside a burial means something different from a vessel found in debris. A tablet in a schoolroom carries a different voice from a tablet in a temple archive. Context is the ground beneath interpretation. Without context, the dead become decorations. With context, they become people again. A quirky story from the history of Mesopotamian studies involves the early excitement around decipherment. Scholars sometimes worked from inscriptions copied by travellers, casts, squeezes, or tablets shipped across continents. Readings changed dramatically as the writing system became better understood. One imagines many confident early translations quietly retreating into cupboards. Ancient languages are very good at humiliating confidence. Still, that humility is useful. It prevents the past from being forced into easy certainty. When discussing what Sumerian texts reveal about the soul at death, careful scholars often avoid claiming more than the evidence allows. They may speak of ghosts, shades, underworld beings, funerary spirits, and ancestral care, while noting that modern terms like soul carry assumptions that may not belong fully to Sumer. This caution is not weakness, it is respect. Scholars continue to debate the nature of the Sumerian surviving self. Was it a ghostly double with personal identity? Was it primarily a ritual category created through burial and remembrance? Was it a weakened continuation of the human being, dependent on offerings? Or did different communities and periods imagine it differently? The debate remains alive because the evidence supports complexity more than simplicity. That is difficult for storytelling. It is wonderful for truth. You stand beside a case containing funerary goods, a small vessel, a bead necklace, a copper tool, a seal, and a folded body position all invite interpretation. The museum label speaks carefully. It may say suggests, possibly, associated with, or interpreted as. These little words are not evasions. They are the honest grammar of ancient evidence. The dead do not provide interviews. They leave arrangements. Those arrangements require reading. A grave with offerings may suggest belief in post-mortem need. A burial under a house may suggest family continuity. A rich tomb may reveal status and power. A missing grave may reveal nothing, or poverty, or destruction, or a different custom entirely. Absence is the hardest artifact to interpret. You feel the weight of that absence in the tablet room. Many Sumerians never wrote. Many graves were disturbed. Many perishable offerings vanished. Many rituals were performed with voices and gestures that left no mark. The surviving record is magnificent, but incomplete. It is a palace with missing rooms, a song with broken lines, a dream remembered only in pieces. Perhaps that incompleteness is part of the subject. Death itself is known through traces. A body, a name, a memory, a possession, a place at the table suddenly empty. Modern scholarship meets ancient death in the same condition. It must infer from what remains. A researcher compares two versions of a myth. In one, a phrase describes the underworld as dark. In another, a line mentions dust. In another, a divine official appears by name. Each version adds a little stone to the path. No one stone gives the road. Together, they let you sense its direction. The work is both scientific and imaginative. It requires disciplined comparison, linguistic expertise, archaeological method, and an awareness of human grief. A translation that is too dry may miss the emotional force of the text. A translation that is too romantic may invent what the clay does not say. The best scholarship walks between them, slowly, like someone crossing a narrow bridge in mist. You hear the soft click of a tablet being set back in its support. The sound is small, but it feels ceremonial. The fragment returns to rest, not underground now, but under catalogue number, climate control, and scholarly attention. Its afterlife has changed. Once it belonged to a scribe and a city. Now it belongs to the long human effort to understand that city's dead. There is a tenderness in the archive. Not sentimental tenderness, because the shelves are too orderly for that. It is a tenderness made from care. Someone preserves the broken object. Someone reads the damaged sign. Someone argues over a line because the difference matters. Someone refuses to let the ancient voice become noise. This, too, is remembrance. The scholars are not performing Sumerian funerary rites, of course. They are not pouring beer for a household ancestor. Yet they participate in another form of keeping. They hold names, texts, and images from disappearance. They restore enough meaning that the dead can be spoken of with precision rather than fantasy. Precision can be an offering, a quiet one. You leave the tablet room with no final answer sealed in your hand. Instead, You carry the method of the answer. Read slowly, compare carefully. Let uncertainty remain where the clay breaks. Notice how myth and burial speak together, but not always in the same voice. Distinguish what is known, what is likely, and what is dreamed. The soul at death, as Sumer presents it, comes to us through that layered work. It is not revealed by a single perfect tablet. It is assembled from graves beneath floors, royal tombs, ghostly dialogues, descent myths, offering lists, divine names, and the patience of modern readers. Each piece is partial. Each piece matters. The room behind you grows still again. The tablets rest in drawers and cases, carrying their damaged underworlds into another night. Somewhere, a scholar will return to the same line and see it differently, because history is not finished when it is discovered. It continues whenever a patient mind listens again, and in that listening, the old Sumerian dead remain neither fully lost nor fully recovered, but suspended in the gentle, difficult light of understanding. The word soul feels smooth in a modern mouth, but the Sumerian dead do not fit smoothly inside it. You stand with that difficulty for a while because the difficulty itself is important. It keeps the ancient world from being folded too quickly into familiar ideas. It prevents you from pretending that Sumer believed exactly what later ages believed, only with older temples and better clay. The surviving self in Sumer is shadowy. That is not a failure of translation alone. It may be the truth of the concept. The dead person appears as a presence, a shade, a ghostly remnant that continues after breath leaves the body. This being can belong to the underworld, depend on offerings, trouble the living if neglected, and retain some personal identity. Yet it is not described as an immortal soul in the later philosophical sense, shining cleanly apart from body, household, and social obligation. It is more entangled than that. You enter a cool room where a body has just been prepared. The air smells of water, linen, oil, and clay. Voices have lowered. A vessel stands ready. The body is still recognizable, though something essential has gone quiet. That absence changes everyone nearby. The same face is present and not present. The person is here and not here. This is where the problem begins. What exactly is left? The Sumerian texts suggest that something persists, but they do not turn it into a tidy diagram. A mainstream historical fact helps frame the matter. Mesopotamian languages use terms that modern scholars often translate as ghost, shade, or spirit. But these translations carry modern assumptions. The ancient concept refers to a post-mortem presence connected to the dead person, the grave, the underworld, and ritual care. That presence is personal, but not free in the modern sense. It may carry the dead person's identity, but it is also defined by status below, treatment above, and memory among the living. It is not a private jewel hidden inside the body. It is a relational remainder. A person becomes many things at death: a corpse, a memory, a name, a shade, an obligation. You may feel the strangeness of that list. It does not satisfy the wish for one simple answer. Yet ancient life rarely divides human beings into neat compartments: body, name, breath, family, work, gods, city, and burial all belong together. To ask where the soul goes may be too narrow. The better question may be, what parts of a person continue, and where do they continue? Some continue in the earth. Some continue in speech. Some continue below. Some continue in clay. Your mind drifts toward a burial. The corpse is lowered into the ground, perhaps under a house, perhaps in a cemetery, perhaps in a place chosen by custom and circumstance. The body does not travel to the underworld as a walking body, yet the shade descends. The grave remains above, or just beneath the living floor. The name stays in the mouths of descendants. The possessions may accompany the dead or signal their identity. The person has become distributed. This is a crucial development. The Sumerian afterlife does not demand that the whole self move in one direction. The body enters decay. The shade enters the lower realm. The name lives in memory. The household maintains connection through offerings. The written record may preserve identity across unimaginable time. Each part has its own fate. A quirky little comparison may help. The modern world stores a person in absurdly scattered ways too. A legal name in a record, a photograph on a shelf, a voice in someone's memory, a favourite cup nobody wants to throw away, a password no one can find, because even grief must suffer administration. Humans have always been distributed after death. Sumer simply admitted it more ritually. The ghost, then, is not everything, but it is not nothing. Scholars continue to debate whether the Sumerian post-mortem being should be understood as a full personality, a weakened double, a ritual status, or a category that shifted across contexts. Some emphasize the ghost's dependence on offerings, seeing it as socially sustained. Others highlight stories where the dead speak, appear, or act, suggesting a continuing individual presence. A careful reading allows the ancient evidence to remain layered. The dead are persons, but changed persons. They are less than the living, but more than memory. This middle condition may explain the uneasy tone of Sumerian death thought. If the dead were fully gone, they could not hunger or disturb. If they were fully blessed, offerings would feel less urgent. If they were fully powerful, the living would live in terror. Instead, they are diminished and dependent, still capable of relationship, still vulnerable to neglect. The soul as shadow is an uncomfortable idea because it preserves need beyond death. A shadow follows form but lacks warmth. It resembles the person but cannot replace the person. It appears when light is blocked, not when light is triumphant. To call the dead a shadow is to say they remain, but in reduced outline. You stand beside a lamp and watch your own shadow fall across the wall. It moves when you move. It stretches when the flame bends. It looks like you and unlike you. It has no face, yet it declares your presence. Perhaps this is why shadow language feels ancient. It captures continuation without comfort. A person after death may become like that, recognizable, diminished, dependent on a light elsewhere. The Sumerian shade belongs to the lower world, but its condition can be affected by the upper world. This is a very particular kind of survival. It is not self-sufficient immortality. It is continued existence through a network. The dead need the living need the dead to remain settled. The gods govern the boundary. The grave holds the body. The name holds recognition. No single part explains the whole. You feel the old worldview becoming more intricate. Death does not simply send a soul to one destination. It rearranges the person across realms. Above, relatives mourn and perform duties. Below, the shade joins the dead. In the ground, the body returns to clay. In language, the name may last or fade. In objects, status and memory may cling for centuries. This arrangement has no clean modern equivalent, and that is why it matters. It reminds you that the question of the soul has never had only one human shape. Some cultures imagine ascent, some imagine rebirth, some imagine judgment, some imagine sleep. Sumer imagines descent, dependence, and memory wrapped around a shadowed continuation. A faint chill moves through the room. The lamp bends once. You think of the dead not as bright spirits freed from matter, but as presences still tied to bowls, graves, doors, offerings, names, and the enormous dark below. There is sadness in that. There is dignity too. The Sumerian dead remain part of the world's structure. They are not discarded. They are woven downward. Perhaps the soul, in this ancient sense, is not an object hidden inside the person. Perhaps it is the continuing pattern of a life after breath has ended, held partly by the underworld and partly by those who remember. It is the person as shade, as name, as need, as relationship. The tablets do not say it so simply. They would probably disapprove of the convenience. Still, The idea gathers from their fragments. What happens at death is not pure vanishing. It is not radiant escape. It is a transformation into a quieter, weaker form of belonging. The self loosens from the body and enters the old below, while other traces remain among the living. You remain beside the lamp until the flame lowers. Your shadow climbs the wall, then shrinks. The room smells of oil and cooling clay. Somewhere under the city, the dead continue in their hidden congregation. Somewhere above them, names are spoken or lost. And in that dim space between presence and absence, the Sumerian soul becomes visible at last, not as light, but as shadow that still remembers the shape of a human life. A debt remains in the house after the mourners leave. It is not written on a tablet, although a scribe would certainly try if given enough clay. It is not shouted in the courtyard. It does not announce itself like a tax collector or a temple official. It waits quietly beside the water jar, the storage room, the family floor, and the place where a name is spoken softly. The living owe the dead, not everything, but something. You feel this obligation in the smallness of the act. A cup is lifted, a portion is set aside, a remembered name is shaped by the mouth. No one watching from outside would see a miracle. They would see a family doing what custom requires. Yet Sumerian belief gives that custom a depth that reaches under the earth. The dead are not simply remembered because remembrance is pleasant. They are remembered because their condition may depend upon it. Their shade belongs to the realm below, but the quality of its existence remains tied to care from above. Food, water, ritual attention, burial order, and family continuity become part of the unseen economy of death. This is an economy without coins. Its currency is care. A mainstream historical fact rests inside this household duty. Ancient Mesopotamian texts from later periods preserve regular rites for ancestors and the dead, and these practices likely developed from deep older traditions of family obligation. The living maintain ties through offerings, invocations, and ritual meals, revealing that death did not sever social identity. It changed the form of relationship. You stand in a courtyard at night. The floor is cool beneath your feet. A jar leans against the wall, and its clay side sweats faintly where water has chilled it. The scent of barley bread lingers in the air. Someone has placed a small portion aside, not carelessly, not extravagantly, but with the steady precision of habit. Habit is powerful. Habit survives emotion. In the first days of grief, the living may weep because the wound is open. Years later, the offering may continue because duty has taken grief into its keeping. This may sound less romantic, but it is often how human memory survives. Passion fades. Formal obligation remains at the table, reminding the heart what it once knew. The Sumerian world understood that repeated acts create continuity. A temple does not survive because one offering is made with great feeling. It survives because offerings are repeated, measured, supplied, and renewed. A household does not endure because one meal is cooked. It endures because meals happen again and again. The dead remain within memory by the same slow method. Repetition becomes mercy. You imagine an elder teaching a younger person the rite. Perhaps the child is impatient. Perhaps the child asks why water must be poured for someone who does not drink like the living. The elder explains, or perhaps does not explain well, because elders are not always as clear as they believe. Still, the child watches the gesture. One day, that watched gesture may become their own. This is how the dead cross generations, not by force, by imitation. A quirky little truth of family ritual is that people often preserve details long after they forget the reasons. A vessel must be placed here, not there. A name must be said in this order. A certain food is proper because it has always been proper. Modern families are no different. Someone will defend a holiday recipe like a city wall, while admitting they have no idea who first made it. Ancestors enjoy this sort of victory. The Sumerian dead may have depended on such stubborn continuity. A family line kept obligations alive even when personal memory faded. A great-grandchild might not know the full face or voice of an ancestor, yet the ritual still link them. In that way, duty carried what affection could no longer carry directly. This raises a difficult question. Did the living care for the dead out of love, fear, social pressure, or religious conviction? Scholars continue to debate this balance. Some emphasize ancestor reverence and kinship affection. Others stress the fear of restless ghosts and the need to prevent supernatural disturbance. Others point to inheritance, property, and family identity as practical forces behind ritual remembrance. The most human answer is probably mixed. Love is rarely alone. Fear is rarely pure. Obligation often contains both. A son may pour water because he loved his father. He may also pour because an unfed ghost sounds like an unnecessary household problem. A daughter may speak her mother's name because grief still pulls at her. She may also do so because custom commands it, and because the family watches. None of these motives cancels the others. Ritual does not require a clean heart. It requires action. That may be one of its strengths. The dead benefit from what is done, whatever the mood of the living. A tired hand still pours water. An annoyed relative still brings bread. A distracted descendant still says the name. In a world where emotion changes like weather, duty provides structure. The underworld may not care whether you felt poetic today. It may care that the offering arrived. You walk deeper into the house. The storage room opens at your side, cool and smelling of sealed grain. The jars are marked, counted, and protected. Food is survival here, not decoration. To give any part of it to the dead means that the household recognizes an invisible claim. The dead remain members of the consuming community, though their consumption is ritual rather than ordinary. This claim could be burdensome. Poor families may have struggled to maintain offerings. Wars, famine, and disease could break the chain. When resources thin, the dead still need attention, and the living still need to eat. Ancient religion often reveals its sharpest edge at the point where belief meets scarcity. A bowl for the dead costs little, until little is all you have. This cost makes the practice meaningful. An offering without sacrifice is only a gesture floating in comfort. In Sumer, where grain required irrigation, labour, storage, and luck, even a modest portion carried weight. The living gave the dead part of the world that still nourished them. The axe said that the bond had not been ended by the grave. You hear a faint sound from the sleeping room. Someone turns in their rest. Outside, wind moves dust along the lane. The house creaks as it cools. These small noises belong to the living, yet beneath them lies the older quiet of those who no longer turn, speak hunger, or sleep as bodies do. The debt remains. It is not paid once. It is maintained. Perhaps this is the deepest Sumerian answer to what happens to the soul at death. The shade descends, but it enters a web of continuing obligations. Its fate is not only in the hands of underworld powers, it is also entrusted, dangerously and tenderly, to those who survive. The living become caretakers of a presence they cannot see. That idea can feel heavy. It can also feel consoling. It means grief has work to do. It means the mourner is not helpless. It means love may take the form of bread, water, and a name repeated in darkness. The dead cannot be restored to mourning, but they can be accompanied in shadow. You return to the courtyard, where the offering rests in lamplight. Nothing spectacular happens. No voice answers from below. No wall opens. No god appears to confirm receipt with proper documentation, although Mesopotamian administration might have appreciated the concept. Only the lamp burns. Only the bowl waits. Only the name remains in the air. Yet perhaps this quietness is the point. The most enduring bonds do not always announce themselves. They remain in repeated gestures, in rooms cleaned for people no longer present, in meals prepared with one portion of memory beside them. The living owe the dead because the dead once gave shape to the living world. Parents, builders, workers, lovers, rulers, servants, singers, children, enemies, and friends all pass downward. The houses they leave behind continue for a while. Then those houses change hands, collapse, or become ruins. Still, as long as someone remembers, the dead are not entirely surrendered to dust. The Sumerian soul survives in a dim place, but it is warmed, if only slightly, by obligations kept above. The shade may dwell below, yet care travels downward through ritual. The name may fade, yet speech can renew it for a time. The grave may be sealed, yet the relationship remains open enough for a cup of water to matter. You stand in that soft opening, neither fully with the living nor with the dead, feeling how ancient and ordinary the obligation is. To remember is to feed. To feed is to acknowledge. To acknowledge is to say that death has changed the bond, but has not erased it. And in the quiet room, where the lamp gives its last small circle of light, the living keep what they owe, not as a grand answer to death, but as a humble refusal to let the soul go hungry alone. The last tablet breaks where you most want it to continue. Its edge is worn pale. A line begins, reaches toward meaning, then disappears into absence. The missing clay feels almost deliberate, as though the ancient world has placed one finger over its mouth. You lean closer, but there is no more text to read. This is how the descent ends, not with certainty, with damage. You stand in the quiet of a ruined archive, where the air smells of dust, dry clay, and old sunlight. Fragments lie in trays, each carrying part of a story that once had rhythm, sound, and purpose. A goddess descends, a ghost speaks, a family pours water, a king enters a tomb with splendor, a nameless person vanishes beyond the reach of burial. A scribe writes a name and does not know it may outlive cities. Together, these traces reveal an ancient answer, but not a complete one. The Sumerian dead go downward. They become shades in a realm beneath the living. They need care, order, offerings, names, and proper placement. They continue, but not in bright triumph. They remain, but altered, weakened, and folded into the hidden structure of the world. The soul, if you use that word gently, does not escape the human story. It carries the marks of family, body, work, memory, and earth. It is not a clean spark flying away from dust. It is more like a shadow still shaped by the person who cast it, moving into a place where sunlight no longer reaches. That may feel bleak. It may also feel honest. A mainstream historical fact holds the final view together. The earliest written traditions of southern Mesopotamia preserve one of humanity's oldest sustained attempts to describe death, not as simple disappearance, but as continued existence within an organized underworld. Archaeology, literature, and ritual evidence all show that the dead remained socially important to the living. The remarkable thing is not only what the Sumerians believed, it is that they wrote, buried, fed, named, mourned, and remembered in ways that still reach you now. Their afterlife was underground, yet their words survived above ground after long burial. Their shades entered darkness, yet their tablets returned to light. There is a strange reversal in that. The dead went below, their stories came up. You step outside the archive into a landscape of ruins. Evening lies over the plain. The sky is wide and fading, washed in copper, violet and grey. Broken walls cast long shadows across the dust. A temple platform rises in the distance, softened by time. Once, priests climbed its steps with offerings. Once, families slept above the bones of their dead. Once, scribes pressed the afterlife into clay with hands that never imagined your world. Now the wind moves through empty spaces. It sounds almost like breath. A quirky little thought lingers at the edge of the scene. Modern visitors often look at ancient ruins and whisper, as if loud speech might disturb something. Of course, the ancient cities were once anything but quiet. They were full of shouting merchants, crying babies, stubborn animals, gossiping neighbours, grinding stones, temple songs, and probably someone complaining about canal maintenance. Ruin seems solemn because time has removed the noise and left only meaning. That is what death does too. It removes the noise. Meaning remains, but quieter. The Sumerian texts do not invite you to imagine death as a grand solution. They do not promise that every pain is healed below, or that every wrong is explained. Their underworld is not designed for emotional convenience. It is old, formal, dusty, and severe. Yet within that severity, a tender system survives. The dead can be cared for. The living can answer absence. Memory can cross where bodies cannot. This is not a loud hope. It is a small lamp. Scholars continue to debate the exact nature of Sumerian belief about the surviving self, the role of offerings, and the relationship between mythic literature and everyday practice. Some questions remain unresolved because the evidence is fragmentary. Others remain unresolved because human beings have never fully agreed about death, even when they share the same house, the same language, and the same grief. That uncertainty is not a failure of history. It is part of the inheritance. You look again at the broken tablet in your mind. The missing line becomes a symbol of every question left unanswered. Did the Sumerians fear the underworld more than they accepted it? Did a mother imagine her dead child as hungry below or held among ancestors? Did a labourer believe offerings would truly reach him? Did a king think gold could soften the dark? Did a forgotten woman hope her name might still be said somewhere? The tablets cannot answer each person. They preserve the pattern. A human dies. The body is placed in earth. The shade descends. The living mourn. The name is spoken. Offerings are made. The underworld receives. Time passes. Memory thins. Clay waits. Perhaps that is enough to make you feel the ancient world close around you. Not as a dead civilization, but as a mirror. You may not share its gods or its underworld map. You may not pour water in the old way. Yet you understand the fear of being forgotten. You understand the ache of wanting the dead to be somewhere. You understand the need to do something when nothing can undo loss. The Sumerians answered with ritual, with clay, with food, with names. They made death part of an ordered universe. Because disorder is hard to endure, they placed the dead below, but not beyond all relation. They imagined a land of no return, yet still allowed offerings to travel there. They accepted mortality, yet fought erasure through writing and remembrance. This is the unfinished descent. Not because the dead return with final explanations, but because the living keep following them in thought. Every generation walks a little way down the road, carrying questions, grief, and stories. Then it stops at the threshold, places a bowl, speaks a name, and turns back toward the fragile duties of mourning. The ruins darken. The first stars appear. Under the earth, the old dead keep their silence. Above the earth, the tablets keep theirs until someone learns how to listen. Between them, you rest in the soft uncertainty that has followed humanity from its earliest cities. What happens to the soul at death? Sumer answers with dust, gates, shadows, offerings, and memory. It answers without closing the door completely. Perhaps the soul goes below. Perhaps it remains in the name. Perhaps it survives wherever the living refuse to forget. And perhaps, as the clay breaks and the night deepens, the story is not yet complete. Now let the city fade gently around you. Let the walls soften into shadow, and let the last warmth leave the clay beneath your feet. Nothing more needs to be solved tonight. The ancient questions can rest beside you without demanding an answer. They have waited for thousands of years, and they can wait a little longer. The river moves far away in the dark, slow and unseen. A lamp burns low in a quiet house. Someone has spoken a name, and the name has settled like a feather on still water. The dead are where the old world placed them, deep below the rooms of the living, beyond the gates, beneath the dust, inside the silence that no empire could empty. You are safe above the earth. You are breathing. The night is wide, but it is not unkind. Let the tablets close. Let the scribes put down their reeds. Let the gates stand where they have always stood, guarded by old powers that need no noise. The questions may drift away from you now, slowly, one by one, like smoke from a lamp in a room where everyone has fallen asleep. The story of Sumer does not end sharply. It lowers its voice. It becomes river mud, moonlight, and clay. It becomes a bowl set down with care, a name remembered for one more evening, a shadow accepted without fear. And as your thoughts grow quiet, the ancient city sinks back beneath the plain, not lost, not fully found, but resting. Good night, traveller of old roads. Good night to the lamps, the tablets, the dust, and the silent houses of the dead. May your own dreams be gentle, and may the darkness around you feel deep, calm, and harmless.